What's up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and today I'm honored to have back on the show for a second time Raytheon Whistleblower, former Navy firefighter and contractor for Raytheon, Stargate Project and MK Ultra survivor, travel lover, my dear friend, and a man on a mission to help circumnavigate the gatekeepers of the disclosure commodity market, Eric Hecker. Eric is coming forward today to share his astonishing and harrowing firsthand account from his time at the South Pole facility in Antarctica, where he witnessed what he describes as highly advanced directed energy weapons, or DEWs, being utilized in ways that he believes, and that we know from corroborating testimony on this particular channel, constitute crimes against humanity. His experiences are not just alarming, they are deeply disturbing, and his sworn testimony before Congress has brought these issues to light in a way that demands our attention. We've explored DEWs, electronic mind control, and the targeting of individuals, often referred to as targeted individuals or TIs, on this podcast before. However, what sets Eric's testimony apart is his willingness to discuss a lesser known aspect of his life that we discussed in the first episode we did together, his childhood involvement in the CIA's Stargate and MK Ultra projects. His decision to speak out about these experiences sheds new light on how his early life influenced his later career paths, including his role as a contractor for Raytheon in Antarctica. For those new to this topic, the Stargate project was a secretive governmental mind control and behavioral modification project aimed at harnessing psychic and psionic abilities using children and humans for military and intelligence purposes, primarily through remote viewing. This context is crucial to understanding the full scope of Eric's journey. Eric's presence here today is driven by a profound moral obligation to expose the hidden darkness within our society, particularly the links between public disclosure, child behavior modification, UAPs, electronic warfare, and government-sponsored child slavery. His courage in addressing these interconnected issues is rare and vital, and he seeks to connect dots that most are afraid to touch. His testimony, given to both the Senate Intelligence Committee and AARO, mark a significant moment in the history of whistleblowing. We are genuinely fortunate to have the opportunity to learn from Eric's survival and resilience. So I urge you all to set aside your distractions, grab a pen and paper, and give your undivided attention to Eric as we delve into and unravel the complex, often concealed layers of disclosure movements with one of the few courageous voices willing to share the truth. Let's dive in, you guys. Before wrapping up the introduction of today's guest, I'd love to share just a couple quick reminders and updates with you guys. If you're interested in appearing on the show, sharing information privately with me, or submitting a written testimony for my upcoming book series or a Substack article, you can reach out to me via email at imagineabetterworld2020@gmail.com or standbysurvivors@protonmail.com. Additionally, I've teamed up with some of my favorite brands to offer you exclusive discount codes on products I love, such as Rife Technology frequency machines and EFT blockers, and CZTL's premium methylene blue. You can find all the relevant links and codes along with other resources in the show notes. Your support across all platforms is greatly appreciated, especially as I've had to shift to alternative streaming platforms such as Rumble and X, following the termination of my former YouTube channel. I've just recently started a new YouTube channel you can subscribe to as well at the handle at Imagination Podcast Official that I will be rebuilding. This transition to multiple platforms is crucial to continue sharing vital information with the public and the disclosure community. Thank you all wholeheartedly for helping to make the imagination the safest space on the internet for survivor, whistleblower, advocate, and educator disclosures. Your support means the absolute world to me. So you guys, without further ado, please help me in welcoming today's guest of honor, voice for the voiceless, survivor and whistleblower, warrior and hero, child abuse advocate, educator, and walking miracle, the one, the only, Eric Hecker. Eric, thank you so much for coming on again today. It's good to see you again.
You got it, Emma. Thank you very much for having me. You give me the greatest intros.
You deserve every word. You deserve a whole,
Thank you. I appreciate it.
you should write a book on your life. Seriously, there's so much.
I That's on my to-do list now.
Oh,
I have more
good.
time on my hands, and I'm going to be delving in that direction. As much as I don't enjoy writing or thinking about most of these things from my past, it's apparently worth putting pen to paper and getting it done.
I think so too, because things on the internet people can take off. A book is easier to eternalize in a lot of ways, and you can also put that on a lot of streaming platforms that people listen to podcasts on.
That's
So I
true.
think that would be a really great thing for you to do, and we definitely
Mhm.
look forward to that.
Mhm.
Since you've been on, which was a couple months ago, And for people who didn't watch that testimony, we detailed Eric's childhood, his time in MK Ultra, and what he's been able to put together from his life during that period and sort of leading up to his older teenage years, getting into adulthood. And I would really encourage you guys to go listen to that. We'll probably talk a little bit about some of those things to connect some dots to what we're going to talk about today later on in the episode with the remainder of his testimony. But I'm going to have that in the show notes for you guys, and I highly encourage you guys to listen to and share that episode also. But since you've been on, Eric, a lot has happened in your life and in these different disclosure communities, and I wanted to maybe, start by catching up with you and first of all seeing what have you been up to since you've last been on? And maybe we can talk about, sort of some of the nuances that whistleblowers go through, because I know that you've also been getting hit with some resistance for speaking out. So I wanted to maybe just start by
Yeah.
catching up with you.
Yeah, you got it. I mean, it is what it is. Being in the front lines of disclosure is a minefield of activity, so to say. And since last we spoke, I have found myself in the throes of unemployment again. It absolutely appears that I am only tolerated a limited amount of success. And then I got bumped back down and have to go through the throes. I mean, it's obvious that the disinformation and misinformation community is very coordinated, very organized, has very deep pockets, and the sad facts of the matter are I can only accomplish so much with the funds that I can generate for myself. And when it seems that it's very simple for, let's just say, other parties to impact my ability to stay properly employed, can add a lot of challenge to the mix. So that is currently my state of the union. Is that once again, I would say I'm financially floundering because I'm not directly employed and generating money and stuff like that. But it's just par for the course when it comes to disclosure. So I will move forwards with bigger steps with the website, networking, doing more live interviews, traveling to get some more connections made, and just it's just doing what I do. Is I bounce back and forth between employers to the best of my ability. Try to stay duly employed and work diligently in the time periods. My grandfather used to say, you got to make hay when the sun shines. So when the sun shines on that field, I reap what I can. And then when, it's not the season, then I shift gears and go on to other things. Now I have more time to do things in the community, and I'll see what I can accomplish with that time. I enjoy working with folks like you, Emma, who I think is an ardent supporter for the truth, children in general, which I think is a fantastic thing, and not all too often discussed in these conversations as the looming least common denominator for a lot of the other woes of the world that we are so easily divided upon. When I think if we just did boil everything down to, like, hey, let's focus on rounding up all the pedos. Like, watch how much other crimes go away. If people are willing to be involved in that activity, I would suggest they're probably involved in a lot of other things before they went down that dark road.
100%. And I appreciate you sharing that about your employment because it really validates so many other people that have come on here and have exclaimed the same thing in their testimony that, it seems like there's always a barrier. The second that I get my feet off the ground, something happens. And it's
Hmm.
always something, around the same time of, starting to become successful.
Yep.
Right at that time, whenever somebody's about to almost be able to, breathe a sigh of relief, something happens in their path and their trajectory gets sabotaged.
Right.
And it doesn't take a genius to see that this is a pattern that happens in these
Right.
communities. But for people
Yep.
who maybe are kind of newer to that or it's not familiar, why do you think that is that there's just like why don't they want you successful? Why would they care now that you're, out, you're whistleblowing? Like why are you what is it like what's the big deal to them? Why don't they want you to be
It's
successful?
just it's because I'm against them. I mean, it's just that simple. It's an easy, modification to my lifestyle that is wholly detrimental to my ability to get the truth out there. I mean, I'm not funded, I'm not backed, I don't have a benefactor. I'm open to all of these things because I agree I can't single-handedly fund the disclosure community. All I can do is, work as hard as I can, use my resources to the best of my ability, and then just simply, lead by example and see who follows. It's, that's just life.
I know. And like I said, this is like a very common problem in this community. And I thought I'd love to know if you had the perfect scenario, and you could guide these different disclosure movements and these communities to contribute. How would that
Mhm.
look? Like what can people do, or how can we sort of solve this issue? Because it really is sad seeing the amount of people that are doing the right things. They're trying to get
Mhm.
back on track from whatever it is that they left. A lot of them don't have family anymore, that, they had to separate themselves from that. They don't have resources. A lot of them don't have money, and we're just sort of like leaving them. And so what do you think, like ideally, like how can these communities step up and support? What can we kind of start doing, or maybe like thinking about doing for these different people?
I guess my brain just goes immediately to integrating with what what my efforts have been, which is getting the website up and running, deciphering.tv. I mean, these are the resources I'm bringing to the community. So I guess in my mind's eye, I would just like to see those resources used more often for the community. So basically, I created a website. It's almost like having a network, a news, TV network, right? But there's no programming on it per se. And if I could seed the community, so to say, to get other people interested in having a platform that they can disseminate their information from, and they could do it without censorship. I think there's a lot of value to that. We see a lot of talk in the communities about, people being content creators, podcasters, whatever you want to call it. But then they're also always talking about how, but we can't say this and we'll get demonetized if we do. Like, I mean, these are all just nooses on our necks and, or leashes, so to say. And that, if you step out of line, there's someone that's going to pull you back in on almost every platform out there. So I guess I've been slowly working towards providing an alternative option for the community so that we don't have to be endeared to these power structures that are silencing the truth. So I guess I'm just letting everybody out there know, like go to deciphering.tv if it looks like something that you might be interested in as a content creator or podcaster. If you would like to be able to distribute your information in a censorship-free environment, shoot me an email. Let's talk. I'm looking to put together a network of good intentioned folks that are trying to accomplish a lot in the world.
100%. And for people too who might be learners and maybe you're not a content creator, this website is still for you. There's so many resources. There's all of Eric's interviews that he publishes on here to let you guys know what platforms he's being featured on. There's articles. There is a lot of information, including different files related to things like DUs and Stargate and things like that. So you guys can go in here and sort of, browse around and find a big chunk of information in one spot too. And thank you for putting that together, Eric. It's really great when, we don't have to go look on the internet for legit things, when other people can kind of put those things together for us. And you have a lot of different resources on here.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm just trying to do the best that I can and, put my best foot forwards every day. And, as the ground changes and stuff, you just have to, modify your activities with, the changing playing field. So that's currently where I'm at right now, is just, shifting gears back into trying to make another push with the website, more live events, more interviews, and just connecting the dots as fast as we the people can get them connected, because it doesn't really look like the government's doing much to help out.
No, I know they throw us these little breadcrumbs that make it seem like, oh, here's the whole story, but it's never going to tie up. And that was one thing I wanted to ask you about right now. What's really hot kind of in these communities, the sort of like breaking disclosures that are coming out revolving around UAPs, UFOs, aliens.
Mhm.
I wanted to get your take on that, and kind of like your bird's eye view on how you've seen this evolve from the last time that you were on here,
Mhm.
and kind of talk about that a little bit because this is kind of like a pivotal moment in time, but obviously it leaves a lot to be desired how this information is being dispersed.
Yeah, I think there's an amazing show going on right now. We just had a whole fistful of whistleblowers come out through the angle of Ross Coulthart with News Nation, and I may have a very different opinion from the vast majority of people out there because I have skin in this game, so to say, right? Like, so all of these people came out and they all started discussing this new common story amongst them of what is the current state of UFOs and UAPs and all kinds of shenanigans. But regardless, from my perspective, I'm watching this, and each one of these individuals effectively has a piece of my story in it. And at first breath, my thought was like, well, that's kind of cool because it corroborates what I'm saying, and I'm watching all of these people make statements about psi abilities and Stargate and programs and things like that, and it started to dawn on me, well, if I know what they're if part of what they're saying is, I mean, technically could just be regurgitated from my story, what about the other parts of the things that they're saying? Is that just stuff that they regurgitated from someone else as well that's been in the community? Did they really say anything that was new information, or were they just new whistleblowers that stated a whole bunch of stuff that's already been said? So to me, it looks like there's an operation going on where there's a fistful of people that were handed a script. Are the stories in the script false? I don't believe so. But I do not believe that these stories belong to these gentlemen. I believe they're actors of some sort that are speaking a truth. So this is where it gets challenging and confusing, and what is disclosure and what's a controlled narrative, what's a limited hangout, and going off of the words of the gentleman. I have watched these disclosure videos, and there have even been statements that alluded to what sounds like super duper top secret briefcases that went missing and are being searched for. So it stinks to me of an intelligence gathering operation with people charging through the doors, basically screaming from the hills, we're the good guys, we're on your side, come talk to us real fast. And they're making statements of agreeability with other previous whistleblower information that has come out, been kind of wholly ignored. But now they're grabbing it and tearing through town under that banner, basically, which I would suggest isn't really theirs.
Great take on that. Another thing that I noticed that I wanted to ask you about, since we touched on it last time too, they, like you said, they name Stargate, they name Gate, even gifted and talented programs that they were scouted through
Mhm.
that. They talk about
Mhm.
psionic abilities. They're talking about UAPs. They're talking
Mhm.
about all the same things that people that went through programs such as MK
Mhm.
Ultra and even Stargate. You're not the only
Mhm.
one that has come forth and been like, this is an abusive program. This isn't just,
Right.
cool thing that they put us in. It's
Mhm.
almost like to me, whenever I'm seeing these stories, it's like they make it seem cool.
Yes.
Like it's not like the way that they form these psionic assets. It's
Mhm.
not cool what goes on behind the scenes to get somebody
Right.
from point A to point B. And it's sort of like an entertainment value thing that they're putting out. But of course,
Yes, it's a big red flag.
they're not talking about behavior
Mhm.
modification. That's not even a part of the equation. What happens to, how this is a grooming process since childhood, even though they're naming all the same programs, they're saying all the same things that every single MK Ultra survivor on my podcast that's
Hmm.
whistleblown has come forth and talked about, including you. They're
Hmm.
leaving that part out, which to me,
Hmm.
is a big red flag too. But I wanted to get your take on that and why you think that might be. Why aren't they connecting these dots?
Because they have an agenda. They're just like I've been saying since I came out, is there's many factions that have many different motives. It's not necessarily for the purposes of getting the truth out to everybody. It appears to me that these folks are towing the party line, so to say, yet again, on there's technology that we're observing, right? As if it's just started, right? This is the hilariousness, as if we're just starting the conversation now. The government is now going to look into UFOs, and now that they're starting to look at it, we agree with the general population. There's something going on, but it's not us because we're just starting to look into it right now because you guys wanted us to now. You know, so the con job going on is they're covering up that we have this technology. We, the people of this planet, many different factions have this technology. It's being wielded all over the place. And that's what they're trying to cover up by having these other operations. I mean, they can control who the spotlight's on. They can control who gets the most views on the internet, all of those things, or at least heavily manipulate. I mean, I don't want to say it's impossible for we the people to do something about it. I'm sure we can, but the current state of the union is it's very easy for them to flood the industry um, within a week with what, 5 or 6 brand new videos, follow up videos. I mean, these are all Hollywood level productions. This stuff doesn't happen overnight. These things have been planned for weeks. These videos have been being cut and edited for a very long time. There's been people behind the scenes grooming these people to make sure that when you're on this show, you say this, and when this guy's on this show, he's going to say that. So now these guys are basically working a room, so to say. It's just an organized faction who's doing their due diligence to apply their intentions to the UFO conversation to get the outcome that they're looking for. And currently, it seems like they're looking to convince the general population of the planet that this is all alien activity, all alien technology, and there's no way that we could do that.
Yes, that's what I've noticed too. They're like, look in the sky. That's where UFOs and aliens are coming from. Nothing. Don't look down here on the ground. Look over there. We need to look in the sky. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
like everything that I see is taking the eyes that people have and maybe have questioned. And because this hasn't like gone mainstream like this, like in quite a
Mm-hmm.
while, where it's been, on this level, if
Mm-hmm.
ever, I know that there hasn't really ever been, this many whistleblowers, but of course, like UFOs and aliens have made headlines and have come forth, especially back in the day with Roswell and different things like that, but always it's look up, look out, instead of look here at your government, look here on your own country's soil and on the soil of other countries that might have this technology. Don't look at the government when it comes to these child, behavior modification programs either. That's not even going to enter the conversation because that might get you to point your finger at the government and then you might start asking questions.
Mm-hmm.
It's like they're trying to divert the attention elsewhere so we don't connect those dots. So it just becomes this like hamster wheel that we've been running in for decades. And that's the
Mm-hmm.
thing too, it's like, what did these disclosures do? These people saw aliens and like disclosed that they have psychic abilities. Like we've talked, like that's not like a brand new conversation. Like what did that really break through to the public, talking about that? It didn't
Mm-hmm.
really. It just sort of like created this sensationalism and almost like entertainment, in my opinion, around it. And like really sort of, everybody that watched it, it sort of encouraged them to again, don't point your finger at the government, don't point your finger at anything happening here. This is all new to us. We're new to it. This is incredibly breaking news. There's something in the sky, something from outer space, something from elsewhere that is, coming here and, making their presence known.
And I think of it also like, do you read the book Lord of the Flies?
Oh,
With
yeah.
with the conch, whoever has the conch has control of the conversation. I look at it as they just stole the conch. So there were already conversations going on in regards to psi abilities and Stargate program, and that these things are intertwined with it. But the people having those bold conversations prior to the recent influx of whistleblowers, the people that were controlling those conversations were people like myself who were being a bit on the bold side. So this is basically them commandeering the topic, controlling the narrative by putting bigger names, bigger whistleblowers onto the topics. So now, if anybody wants to look up, gate program whistleblower, who are they going to get? They're going to get the guy that says, "This is aliens. It's not the government. It's not us." This is
100%.
just this is just marketing and narrative control.
And the scary thing for me is seeing that now they're putting their feelers out and asking to recruit people in a sense of, if this information applies to you, come to us, send us an email. We'd love to interview or feature you. And it almost seems like this funnel where now they're trying to discover others out there that actually have actual abilities that might be vulnerable and looking for help, possibly
Mhm.
to, who knows, exploit them, who knows.
Mhm.
And it's getting, vulnerable people to disclose information to these journalists who are coming forth and saying, we're here for the good of humanity, we're here to help, but nobody's asking questions of, are you? Like, what is your agenda behind this? Why
Right.
why are you helping to cover this up? And why are you recruiting vulnerable people without giving safety protocols to them, and presenting like a safe way for them to disclose without putting their lives at risk or jeopardizing them. And that worries me too, seeing all these people finally excited. Oh my gosh, somebody's talking about Gate. I was in Gate and I had all this stuff, and they're vulnerable. And then now they're writing emails to these people because they're asking them to. And it just seems like, sort of um, maybe a way to reaccess vulnerable
I
people.
would say is the minefield of the front lines of disclosure. It's not a safe environment. I mean, I've been doing this for a few years now, and I can certainly say that in my travels sailing the seas of disclosure, there are some people that are willing to assist you if you get in trouble, and there's other people that are looking to sink your ship constantly. I mean, this is not a level playing field of good intentioned people all working collectively for the betterment of man. There are infiltrators into this disclosure community that there's probably more people in the disclosure community, content creators, podcasters, that are here to control the narrative, to misinform and disinform, than there are people that are champions for the truth for the people of this planet.
Part of what encourages me, though, about what you said about this being a cover up is that clearly people like you are getting loud enough that it's threatening them. Would you agree?
Mhm. Oh yeah, absolutely. Because it's, in many ways, the powers that be have egos that would make them think that, an average Joe can't accomplish anything. Um, but it's kind of infuriating and um, fear-inducing for them to see when ground can be gained by those efforts.
100%. For people that are, wanting to speak out and looking for safety to do so, I know that it's like never really safe to come forward. There is a lot of risk, and maybe you could talk about some of that risk and what you've experienced or what somebody might be able to expect. But what would be some advice that you would give to people when seeking out a journalist or a podcast host or, somebody legit? Because even like you've gone on podcasts too that I've seen, the person may have a appeared to have good intentions when they invited you on. And then once you were on, it was like a switch flipped. And all of a sudden now, like you're in the hot seat and they're almost like interrogating you,
Mhm.
trying to discredit you while knowing that all these people are going to watch, which by the way, you handled those, podcasts amazingly. Like those people couldn't step on you no matter how hard they tried. But that's like a real thing that, survivors and whistleblowers coming forth might not expect. They might just think like, oh my gosh, somebody's inviting me on. Like it's going to be safe. I'm going to be fine. Like, how do you
Mhm.
navigate all of that comes in your path?
That's an excellent question, and it's a wholly complex answer because it's taken me years to I guess, get a good feel for the lay of the land. I mean, sometimes I can tell things are going to go smooth and it's very simple. Sometimes I can tell things are going to go bad, and I do try to avoid simply even engaging in circumstances where I feel like my energy is just going to be wholly wasted. So there's some interviewers I avoid because it's like an obvious barrage of red flags. But then, sometimes I do get involved, like you said, where um, outside of my control and, up until the last second, things seem on the up and up. But yeah, there are people in these communities that are doing their best to destroy the truth. But back to the vein of this question is, what kind of insights towards other people that want to come out with the truth. And I would just simply say you have to be bold. If you have something to say, I'm going to challenge you to say it. But I will not sugarcoat it. As Em is bringing up, the process is full of pitfalls. So I would say move forward with great boldness, um, and be prepared to be really decisive, because people and environments will change very rapidly from how they originally presented.
Great answer. Yeah, because I think that could really destabilize somebody and make sort of reflect on what say that the podcast host wants to make the person look bad. It could if somebody's not prepared for something like that and it totally destabilizes them, and I was so impressed watching you navigate some of that came your way. You just kind of sat, you looked so relaxed and were just like so ready to, combat it. And you didn't do it in a mean way. You didn't do it in a condescending way, even though the people may have acted that way towards you. You really like just had a very sophisticated and articulate way to answer these questions, and I think that that's a really good way too, that we see truth. Like you didn't even have to think about what you were going to say. You just did. You just, like you said, you were just bold. You just re-answered the questions as if they were asking it to you nicely. And you didn't have to think like how a liar would, even though they were trying to frame you that way. It was really obvious that this stuff back and forth, front to back, because it's your actual experience. And no matter how much somebody tries to tell you different, you really stood by that and held your convictions tight. And it was really amazing to watch, actually. I was like, I wish every survivor could watch that, actually, because it sets
And
us
I'm better at it now because of practice. I used to be caught more off guard. I did not used to be so cool, calm, and collected when I would initially get blindsided like that. Um, but through practice, because it happens so often, I've become better at it. But even with that being said, going through this whole process was very educational for me. So as a whistleblower, I started to learn how much the community is actually anti-whistleblower.
which
But
is
there's only one way to figure that out, is to be an actual whistleblower trying to go through a community that says we're here to help. And then you start realizing, but you're not helping. You're hindering the truth. Like I see this very regularly. It's few and far between that I can have conversations with someone like yourself that can appreciate that, this, because you come from the environment where you're a student of the atrocities of children, like you really are aware of how disingenuous people can be, how much they can present, this is a wonderful good thing for you. And then they go completely the other way. And this is, it's super horrible to think of it in the world of children, but it's the same format of operations in so many other things that are just simply disingenuous activity. And it brings us right to the current state of the disclosure community. It seems to be ripe with disingenuous folks by every definition, because they're all trying to commandeer a certain part of the conversation, be the champion of that topic, and then be some sort of a go-to specialist that no one else can question the science thereof.
Yes, exactly. And in our
Mhm.
first interview, sort of like how we were just talking about, recognizing the compartmentalization of information and how there's dots that can clearly be connected. There's puzzle pieces that fit perfectly together that by
Hmm.
design are being kept separate. So we're
Hmm.
just constantly running in this loop of asking questions and never having an answer because the puzzle pieces all around it are floating elsewhere and nobody's connecting them for us. And
Hmm.
that's been like such a incredible thing about this podcast that I didn't realize would happen to me is being able to see those overlaps through hearing so many testimonies and being like, gosh, that's interesting. These people, all these children were chosen for these projects, and a good majority of them were introduced at some point in their childhood through these programs to UAPs, to advanced technology, to directed energy weapons. A lot
Hmm.
of them are then attacked by directed energy weapons and targeting after they happen to get out and whistleblow. There's patterning
Hmm.
like how we were just talking about losing income, losing opportunity, being sabotaged. There's all these like overlapping patterns that happen. And so when I see all these UAP whistleblowers and journalists talking about it and they're not connecting it to the bigger picture, if people
Hmm.
understood how these things really went together, we'd know who to point the finger at. We'd have an understanding of what's happening, and there wouldn't be this conspiracy around it. We'd be like, holy crap, the government is responsible for all of it, like, and it all goes together, right? And I think that that's what they fear most is us realizing all of that. And that's why there's
Hmm.
these concerted efforts, like you said, to compartmentalize, to have like a swarm of people come forward and disseminate the same story so it seems credible. That's
Hmm.
what the mainstream media does. If 20 channels are saying the same thing, it brainwashes us to say that's true. If there's
Hmm.
one little, whistleblower out in the corner saying, no, listen to me, people are like, you're crazy. These 20 channels said you're wrong. And so
Hmm.
it's like they're basically taking those same methods from MSM and bringing it into the disclosure community and saying,
1,000%.
yeah,
Hmm. 1,000%. Yeah, everybody thinks, I've said before that, nobody really argues if I make this statement, the mass media is wholly corrupted. Everybody's like, yep, absolutely. But if I continue and say the internet is part of the mass media, it's the way of the world now. It's a part of the mass media that we all just agreed is wholly corrupted.
that's a really great way to put that. And yeah, I think that's like people think because they're not watching the news that they're everything, it's all alternative media. It's not the news. So I'm getting the truth. And it's like, you
And
really,
there's algorithms everywhere. Everybody knows that there's algorithms. Algorithms determine when you search for something what gets put in front of you. And there's people that can pay to be prioritized on the front end of the algorithm search. People think that they go on the internet and information randomly arrives in front of them that's supposed to correlate to what they just looked for. Like nobody has the capacity to invest in what gets placed in front of you. I mean, it's ridiculous at this point, um, if people are that naive.
100%, yes. And for anybody that happens to see this episode too, I would encourage you all. I know that there is some exciting stuff, and so it is exciting that some of this information, at least whether true or not by the people saying it, a lot of what they're saying is true. So it's reaching new people. Some people will end up finding,
Mhm.
researching Stargate and coming across Eric's story and finding the actual truth. So, there is some good that can come out of just having this
There
information
is.
out there.
Yeah.
But, for people like that calling forth for, okay, anybody who's gone through this, contact me, contact me. I know
Hmm.
it seems really exciting, but really like do your research on these people that are recruiting, you know,
Hmm.
ask other whistleblowers, ask the community, come together just like they are and figure out who's safe and who's not before we get so excited that,
Hmm.
it puts you in danger or puts somebody that you know in danger. We have to really use discernment whenever these things come forward. Because like Eric said, a lot of these things are mainstream media operations disguised as alternative media. And we can get really confused in a way with our excitement and our ability to embrace it, not realizing that the agenda is actually against us and they're not for you in what they're offering, all these, diamonds and glitter with these
Hmm.
disclosures. And we have to be really careful with that because, I think that's a big part of all of this happening is making sure that as a community, we're keeping people safe, that we're not giving abusers the ability to reaccess people, that we're not handing off information to dangerous people,
Mhm.
and contributing to something that's ultimately going to be hurtful for survivors and destabilizing for survivors. So I really appreciate your insights, Eric, because like I said, you're one of the few people that's like willing to connect all of this. And I also think if there's people, journalists, podcasters that say that they're authority, that they're an authority, and they're not sharing the full story, like how Eric is, from childhood to adulthood and how this all goes together, these different government programs that they run on children, all the way to, creating psionic assets from behavior modification programs and different different positions for a government and different positions in society that the government puts these children in that they groom and grow. We need to really be questioning those people and putting pressure on them and saying, well, why aren't you connecting these dots? Like you say you're the authority, but you're not talking about all of it. Why are you trying to
Mhm.
protect the government? We need to put all these things together. So we also need to do our due diligence. Like Eric said in the beginning, we need to come together for whistleblowers and survivors, and we have to push the needle in the right direction, just like how they're doing it and disseminating information together. We all have to come together too and be able to form sort of, the good army that's, helping push the truth out there and getting that in front of people. A really interesting time, Eric, and there has been like so
Yeah.
much that has happened since you've been on last with all of this.
And while you were just chatting there, it made me actually think too that the current batch of whistleblowers from Ross Coulthart, again, I watch these people speak, and some of the things that they're saying that are red flags are similar to other whistleblowers like Elizondo and Grush, where they have made statements to the fact that the stuff that they're stating publicly, they have run up their chain of command to get approval to say it, that there are processes, that they're writing books, that their books have gone through and checked to see. So this is not actual whistleblower activity in my book. This is approved dissemination of government information through approved channels. This is not, it is not a grassroots, legitimate whistleblowing operation. It is some sort of other activity or operation that appears to have intent to sow a particular story into the community. And that story is the one they're communicating, which you and I know certain parts of it have veracity in regards to being truthful tales. But again, I question whether these gentlemen are actually associated with the tales or just tapped as approved disseminators of information.
And maybe before we get into talking about the second part of your testimony, for the audience, they're seeing these quote unquote whistleblowers and really any whistleblowers that get a public platform sort of fit that same narrative that you're talking about. Can you talk on the other end? You mentioned earlier about employment being an issue. What are some other way that actual whistleblowers, like what is it like being an actual whistleblower telling the real truth?
You get pot shots fired across your bow pretty regularly. Um, I guess a lot of it would be trying to break down the barriers, the margins, um, removing the spotlight from the people that are being put up on pedestals. So, just as an example, right? Myself, my experience has a lot to do with the GATE program in Antarctica. There's a lot of people that are actually in the disclosure circles discussing what's going on in Antarctica that have never been there, have zero experience, but yet they pontificate on podiums, they have spotlights shined on them. So a lot of the issues that I have as of late is trying to figure out how to sail the seas of the disclosure community to basically get the truth from, where I found it on one shore, so to say, and sail it through these seas of disinformation, while apparently these other Antarctic topic folks have these massive vessels built for them to share their disinformation while firing shots across the bow of my little dinghy, that's just trying to get legitimate truth out to folks. So I think it has a lot to do with becoming cognizant that the community is not as genuine in their stated collective effort to connect the dots, to get the truth out there. So I guess I'm just learning the hard way that the system in this capacity is a bit dysfunctional for its claims. It doesn't actually follow its mission. So I guess I'm just trying to, do the best that I can to provide an alternative route to meet folks like you, to connect, to see who's on more of a true course of applying energy for an actual gained improvement and benefit in the world around us, instead of just, talking all day long and wasting people's time and, incorrectly connecting the dots, having no idea how to vet people. That's one of the things that I find super interesting in the disclosure community, is that this seems to be a problem for content creators, the end user watching the content. And it's so intriguing to me that a lot of these people that speak on the topic of Antarctica and bring in whistleblowers from Antarctica and stuff. Did anybody ask what process they're using to vet these people? I mean, you've never been to Antarctica. So if somebody came to you and was like, Emma, let me tell you about all this stuff going on in Antarctica, like what process would you use to vet them? You know, wouldn't it be easier to bamboozle you than it would be to bamboozle me in that regard? So this is one of the things that I keep screaming from the mountaintops too, is that I'm watching these other content creators get bamboozled. I appreciate they would have no idea how to vet someone, but it amazes me that they lack that appreciation. The audience lacks that appreciation. And it seems like anybody that shows up and wants to discuss Antarctica, having no verified proof that they were ever there, somehow seems to get the podium and the spotlight over someone like myself who can prove it. I mean, these are really weird things that, from my perspective, I'm like, how come nobody else seems to notice or care about this?
Right, yeah. And I think we've
You
got
know?
it comes down to that sort of critical thinking that has been stripped from a lot of us from all the
Hmm.
mind control that the general public has been
Hmm.
susceptible to from the time that they were children, and how that's been,
Hmm.
there's been mind control operations on everybody. But I completely agree with you on that, and one of the things even that I saw in this big disclosure group that came out with the UAP community that you were just talking about, one of the whistleblowers, when talking about gifted and talented gate program that he was in, said he had a great experience. And I'm thinking,
Hmm.
what a weird thing to say when all of these whistleblowers are coming forth, that the
Hmm.
reason why the GATE program is popular in these disclosure communities is because it's the opposite.
Hmm.
People are saying that they
Hmm.
experience abusive conditions.
Hmm.
So then to paint it to the public that's watching, that's sort of, benign to this information and wants to learn from a credible person, when that's
Hmm.
being shown to people, it again it takes the finger away from, wait a minute, there's something nefarious happening in a gifted and talented program. I need to look into this because I have kids, or my friends have
Hmm.
kids, or this is really concerning. It sort of takes that
Yeah, I
control
mean,
away. And
how many weeks away are we from the disclosure circles where maybe these same new folk literally just turn the page and start preaching about how amazing the GATE program was for them as children, that afforded them these opportunities.
100%, yes.
And they'll say, "Oh, and the people that are out there, the crazy ones that are talking about, being molested in one of these programs. I mean, look at us. We're doing great. We went to and now we're whistleblowers."
Exactly. So it sends this
Yeah.
like this
Mhm.
falsehood over again, abuse. Like it
Mhm.
takes all the finger pointing away from any child abuse
Mhm.
being involved, that the government has their dirty fingers in these things,
Mhm.
and it does a big disservice to the community when they're saying we're serving the community. They're not telling
Mhm.
the whole story. Like, why would you put somebody up in that position of authority when, even if they had let's just say the person did have a good experience in Gate. There's some people that said that they don't remember anything bad happening. Okay, let's just say
Hmm.
you're one of the rare ones that does. At
Hmm.
least be educated enough to speak on the other side too and to share the full story and not just
Hmm.
telling a good experience when there's hundreds of people coming forward, if not thousands, saying, oh my
Hmm.
gosh, like something bad happened to me there, especially MK Ultra survivors and people who are actually in these programs. It was not this happy-go-lucky experience that you or anybody had being selected for this. This was,
Hmm.
a crime against humanity that was happening. And to be framed, and like you said, if a whole bunch of people come forth and disclose, it's great, it's wonderful, you should put your kids in it, go apply for it, it's an honor, it's this awesome privilege. And like you said, look where I am.
Yeah, it's
It
like the next recruiting season for him.
Exactly. And then it's like, look how easy that is to like change the narrative once again and to like take
Hmm.
innocent people and get them to be complicit in crime basically by their own ignorance and being sucked into a false narrative.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there does have to be better vetting. And for me, like I would never bring somebody, if somebody like literally maybe had, let's just say somebody had like 30 years of experience like researching Antarctica. They haven't really been there a lot, but they've just dove in and they know all this research. Okay, like let's talk about that. But for
Mhm.
me, vetting personally, like I would rather just go to somebody like you that actually was there, that physically was there, that spent time there, and that has a story that corroborates whatever the quote unquote conspiracy is that we have questions about. Like always go to the source. We don't need third party people talking on behalf of you. So it is really
Mhm.
crazy how, far away people have gotten from vetting and that they're just inviting people on who say that they are,
Mhm.
an authority on this, but they don't actually have any connections to it, or at least no provable ones where somebody like you does. And
Mhm.
so I wanted to start getting into that because this part of your story is probably what you're more well known for, with a lot of the interviews that you've done. This has been a big topic of discussion. And of course, on this podcast, too, there's a lot of targeted individuals. We've talked about directed energy weapons a lot and trying to educate people on a personal level, how these things can affect, but also on a big picture scale, which is really what you talk about, which I think is, really important for the public to know how these things are, being experimented on with individuals, and then bringing it up to this higher perspective of how this is a crime against humanity using these weapons on the general public and how they're able to do that. So before we get into actually Antarctica, we had left off last time with talking about your journey through childhood and then getting up to your young adult years, starting to graduate, right around that graduating high school, making your decisions on what you're going to do next with your life. And I wanted to maybe start there so we can start connecting some of those dots. And maybe if you wanted, we could start by, you had mentioned last time, and for people who maybe weren't here, a couple connections on the military path that you ended up taking and some little places in your life in your past where that's sort of connected. So maybe if you want to start talking about, how that path ended up being laid out for you and what made you choose that path after, and we can start diving into what happened after that.
Mhm. Well, I guess it would be remiss if I just didn't remind the audience that I had the Stargate capacity in my youth, and now here I am about 18 years old. I came from a military family, I guess you'd say. Father was former Navy, grandfather was former Navy. As much as I had excelled in school in my younger years, got to a point, I guess you'd say about seventh, eighth grade, where I kind of rebelled entirely against all of academia. So I made it through high school. I technically went to a very good high school for academics. That if I had put some effort in, I could probably be president of the United States at this point, something to that effect. Like it was a very good school that I put no effort into. I was I was smart enough to ace every test and do whatever minimum, and I mean minimum amount of homework and or whatever special projects, reports, or whatever. Um, yeah, so I think I graduated high school with a 69 average and was proud of myself because I was just trying to hit that number. 65 was like passing, but the school considered you a moron if you had a 65. So I think I aimed for 69, hit the target, and thought I was like super cool, like. But with that being said, I did not have um, a college future in me. I came from a blue collar world. I hadn't put much thought into a future. And then, one day I just found myself in some knuckleheaded job that I was like, yeah, I guess it's probably time to go talk to a Navy recruiter and just see what options I have available. So I went in, I got dialed in, got set up to do the ASFAB test, the military aptitude test, and I scored really highly on it. And then next thing I know, I was getting pulled out of one room, dragged into another room with a whole bunch of sailors. And next thing you know, they're trying to offer me all kinds of courses. And this one dude vying for my attention was trying to get me into the submarine service. And that guy got my attention more than the other folks. So we started chatting, and he started laying out the options that I would have if I volunteered to go in that direction. And effectively, that's what I went for. And 1994, I joined the United States Navy with a contract to go into the submarine service after boot camp, and it would have gave me a 6 year enlistment. So it was a little bit more of an obligation than the standard military service, just because they give you a bit more training, and that's just how those things work.
And when you were going through this process, um, had you connected any of those dots or remembered anything yet of childhood, or did this all seem super organic? Did you ever have thoughts of like, wow, this is all like working out so perfect? Or did that not enter?
Totally, totally organic. Nowhere near my mind at that point that I was involved with anything peculiar, out of the ordinary. I just thought I was, standard life, standard normal guy.
And so what happened after that? When did you start and where were you located? And what was that journey like going into the Navy?
I did boot camp in Great Lakes, Illinois, like so many people do. It was my first delve into painful cold.
Oh,
Yeah, it was painfully cold in March of 1994 when I got over to the Great Lakes area. I wound up being almost immediately pulled from the company complement and put on what they called divisional staff, which was super interesting because I got to boot camp, like, you see in the movies, everybody runs around with the company commander or drill instructor and kind of gets their asses beat all day long. I got removed from that and got given a job. So all of in the movies, when you see them in the barracks, that's, a company, a group that resides in one room in a building, and that building's called a division in Navy terms. So the division has a staff that runs the whole building that all the different companies reside in. So I was nominated to be on divisional staff. So I was removed from the company complement, reported to a division officer, and basically did yeoman's work, which was administering to all the paperwork that runs the division that all the companies are in. And then in addition to that, I was tapped to run work parties. So we had, at the time, Great Lakes, Illinois facility was being switched over to bring in female recruits. And they were going to have them residing on the top floor of all of the divisions. So they were sandblasting the windows so that, the boys couldn't look in and see the girls. And they were, stripping floors, waxing floors, stripping paint, painting bulkheads, painting racks, just basically field daying the whole room and making it look brand new in every way, shape, or form. And every single day in boot camp, I would put together work teams and go get volunteers from each company and then, assign them to the work tasking for the day. So that was my boot camp experience was unlike most people's because we were doing work. And the really funny thing was I still had to show up every Friday for testing for courses that I never sat in.
what? How did you do?
I passed, but I mean, it was nerve-wracking because yeah, we still my team, take different volunteers every day, so they'd only be negatively impacted for the curriculum, one day a week per se. But I had divisional staff that, we would also have to figure out how to study to be prepared for a test for a class we never took. So we had to do that every week. That was yeah, that was mind-numbing.
Oh my gosh, I can't even imagine. That's
Mhm.
amazing how smart you were that you could, both in your academic school years as a child and, young adult and going into this, that you could just
Mhm.
sort of, like you said, do the bare minimum when it came to the testing and still be able to,
Mhm.
pass
Well,
and,
I'm not. We utilized the resources to the best of our ability, which was paying attention to who were the good recruits, who
yeah.
were the smart guys, who took good notes, and we would borrow notebooks from who we thought were the scholars of the class, so to say. And yeah, we would utilize their notebooks to do little study sessions and sometimes hit them up with Q&A sessions. And that's how we kept up to speed.
Do you think, I know that it was sort of like a division of that not everybody that went through boot camp and was in the Navy got selected for what you went into. Did you
Mhm.
see or can you see looking back, was there any correlation with that selection being because of the mind control and because what you went through as a kid? Was there any other red flags with the other people that were in there with you that maybe they were specifically selected for a reason too? Or how did you see sort of that pattern follow you
I,
when you
I
went to the
don't
Navy?
know that I could align the pattern to that node, so to
Yeah.
say. But if I was to just provide any speculation whatsoever, the only thing that I do know is my section leader, who mandatorily volunteered me for the role, did happen to be someone who was from New York. So theoretically, there's a possible connection there, but nothing that I could really pin down. Basically, it turned out I was able to make my bed really well at the front end. So when they started mowing through, who's not screwing things up so badly right now at this point and could potentially take on more responsibility. And I just happened to be
Top contender.
doing well at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I see that throughout your life that you have, you've been through so much horror and trauma, but at the same time, you've always been able to overcome that when it comes to figuring out problems and solving problems and being able to, be a high performer in really stressful situations. And I think
I
that's
think that was
what,
boot camp. At that moment was hilarious too, because that's what makes me laugh is that's when everybody was all freaking out and everybody's getting yelled at, for the first few days, and you know, a lot of people show up to boot camp have never, ever, ever, ever been yelled at before in their life, and it's really fascinating. It's such an amazing study of human nature, um, to watch people just lose it because they can't. Um, they have zero experience with anything negative being fired across their bow. So the beginning of boot camp can be a very negative environment and soul crushing for some people.
yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, yeah. And for you, it was unfortunately very normalized throughout your life to deal with that
For
type of
me, the
trauma.
hardest part was not laughing lots of times.
And it was probably like it probably seemed like nothing compared to what you had went through
It
too.
seemed like comedy to me. I mean, I'm coming from New York and being raised the way that I was raised. Like, I knew this, like, the guy's yelling at me, this guy's saying all kinds of stuff. Like, what's he really gonna do right now? Like, and I already knew the answer. Like, technically, he's not gonna do anything other than yell something else that's super funny if you take it out of the personal diet. Like, if you saw it in a movie, it'd be hilarious. So, I mean, technically, what's the difference if you happen to be standing there on the receiving end? Like, the stuff coming out of the guy's mouth is still brilliant comedy.
Totally, yeah. I honestly think that, if you could sort of be a fly on the wall instead of like being in your body and having emotions, it is
Hmm.
silly that these like grown men are like paid to like, basically instill fear into people
Yeah.
in a way.
Yeah. And they're doing a job too. That's another thing that people don't realize. Like, as if the drill instructor's truly that mad at you. No, he's just doing his job. You tied your bootlaces wrong. In his brain, he's just thinking, this guy's an idiot. I told him 9 times how to tie his shoes. This guy's just a bonehead. He's not really mad. He's just like, how dumb can you be? Like, but
Totally.
it's his
Yes.
job. It's his job to be infuriated and pepper the conversations about how, it's your mother's fault and, like all these things to try to dress you down, so to say. So to me, it was watching a very professional act, filled with traditions of brainwashing and, you know, things that function.
I was going to ask your opinion on that because that's something I've thought about a lot over these years since just learning about mind control and whether
Mhm.
it's on the public, on a big population of people, or on an individual. It seems like some of that patterning does happen in military training. And I don't think
Totally.
people like sort of connect that like, oh, like sort of what they're talking
Bootcamping is a
about.
brainwashing process to the extreme. Yeah, I mean, yeah, anybody that's gone through boot camp knows that they're totally messing with your head. I was under the impression that 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, every second of every day was scheduled. These are the Navy's been around for what, hundreds of years now. Hundreds of years of tradition unmarred by progress, so to say. That they have a process. And if it's, day 17 at 9:07 in the morning, they already have it planned out what's supposed to be going on right at that moment to, build up a little bit more tension or to set this dude off over here. Um, they have it dialed in. They know what they're doing.
Totally. Yeah. And I
Mhm.
don't think that that's something that the public really thinks about. Although I think to some degree they're maybe unconsciously questioning it. I hear so many people who know somebody that went in the military and they're like, whenever they came out, they weren't the same. And it's like, well, yeah, because they had a behavior, modification program that they were
Mhm.
forced to go through. It might not have been
Mhm.
exactly what you went through as a kid, but there's still a
Mhm.
process of changing someone's behavior to get a desired effect in a group form.
Absolutely. Hmm. Yeah. Yep.
And so do you remember, or maybe there wasn't, but when did your abuse stop? Did that continue when you went in the military? Like how some survivors, go still their behavior modification programs continue, their abuse continues, they're continuing to be handled. Did a lot of that or all of that stop once you went into the military and got out of school? Or do you remember or have memories of, you know, programming and different ways that you were being used still for these programs whenever you went into the military?
Um, Interesting way to put it. I guess the um, direct abuse aspect dwindled, but things had changed. So I think it became more mental, excuse me, than physical at that point. And yeah, I think it was just like I'm thinking of I had gone to um, see the Raytheon technician when I was in the submarine service. So that wasn't um, physical, I guess you would say. Hooked me into a chair of some sort. So, I mean, I guess there's that physical aspect. But it wasn't, beatings or anything to that effect at that point.
And a Raytheon technician, was that somebody that came on the base and met with you? Were there other people or was it just you?
Oh no, he met with other folks. He seemed to have some sort of freaky deaky secret lab beneath one of the schools that I was in. So that was an encounter that I had um, with peculiarity, but it was more of a project issue than a physical abuse situation.
Were they doing like brain experiments? Do you remember like a helmet or anything in the chair?
I do remember getting strapped in. I do remember, it's actually funny. I just did a regression on this recently. Um, it seems like it was some sort of I don't know. I mean, it could go either way. I'll use the best words that I can to describe what I saw, which was basically it was like as if I guess my consciousness was traveling through space and time or something to that effect.
Okay. So it does seem
Mhm.
like there was still some type of like they were still trying to access you and use you for some of the same things that you were used for as a child.
Absolutely. It almost seemed like a, a follow-up visit or something like that, or a skills check at a current point, you
How old
know.
were you when that encounter happened?
That would have been, let's see, I would have been 18 or 19 years old.
Okay, so pretty soon after you initially entered, this was
Hmm.
something that happened not
Hmm.
too long into your military journey. And so
Correct.
that's a puzzle piece right there that you
Hmm.
had an encounter with somebody from Raytheon at 18 years
Hmm.
old.
Hmm.
And so how did that sort of develop? Because then that, Raytheon has sort of followed you throughout your life and into Antarctica. So let's sort of lead into that. How did that progression of how you said the abuse evolved? It wasn't necessarily you being physically abused and constantly experimented on, but you were still being guided in a way in a specific direction that, people wanted you to go in and that you were very qualified for from all the skills that you had and were groomed for. So let's kind of talk about that evolution of where your journey started to take you.
Yeah, I think that that event with the Raytheon guy in the submarine service was some sort of a follow-up for sure. Um, there was another gentleman that I had met when I was at the New London train station who was, I guess, for lack of a better term, some sort of CIA uh, handler or something like that, someone that was meant to cross paths with me. And I think that the time that that event occurred, the time with the Raytheon employee, were all in very close proximity. So I almost feel like I was graduating from one team and being moved into another at that time period. That it was, something was being checked out, more contact needed to be made. I had just made it through basic enlisted submarine school, graduating from there with great accolades, I guess you would say. I did really well in there. The class that I was part of, if I remember correctly, was Providence class, 1994, United States Basic Enlisted Submarine School, and we qualified for what they called best of basic enlisted submarine school. So it's when a class does so well that you reach this status, they will actually take a plaque and put it on the wall with the other classes that have reached this level before. And apparently it was a big deal at the time because no one had done it in a really long time. So it's not like this happens with great regularity. It's not like they're doing it all the time. This is a rare event. And the class that I was in, we qualified. And I believe that that was probably also some sort of a marker or a bell that dings for other folks in other programs that are like, oh, look, boys, we got another batch of best ofs over here. Let's go take a look. See what, the new recruits look like. So I think being in that best of class, um, once again, got me on the radar and attention of, third party folks. That, again, deciphering my experience in my past, I seem to just keep showing up on lists of things that are like, oh, well, that has value. Oh, well, that could be useful to us. One of the things that's so amazing to me is that how much in hindsight things are so crystal clear. But at the time, in chronological order, direct firsthand, first time seeing stuff, um, it really makes my brain, similar to like boot camp, um, from the perspective of the recruits. It's like this new thing, never been like, it's a new experience. They don't realize how contrived it is, how every second of every day, every aspect has been plotted, schemed, planned, um, with specific intentions for specific outcomes. And I feel like in hindsight, when I look at my life, I'm starting to see the machinations of so much intention for so much outcome.
Yeah, and it's real. I think for a lot of people who grew up in a way that you did, it's not so obvious, even though looking back, you can be like, oh my gosh, that was so obvious, like how this all funneled into
Hmm.
each other, that all these things were interconnected. There was this person that
Hmm.
connected it, or this
Hmm.
introduction, or this person, whatever the situation is, this location,
Hmm.
there's a clear path that you can see looking back, but in the moment, it's not so
Hmm.
obvious. The people that come in do seem very random. Or, of course,
Hmm.
there's the dissociation element where you might not even remember things that are happening to you until later on.
Hmm.
But it does seem like, I've seen podcasts where um that you were on where a host would say, well, I think it's sort of sketchy that you ended up with Raytheon. Like that's the sketchy thing. Like it's not sketchy what's happening in Antarctica. It's sketchy where you ended up. And it's like, did you take the time to like figure out how a person got to where they are before saying these
Hmm.
things? Because it's obvious, right from this person that worked for Raytheon coming to you and, basically running an experiment on you.
Hmm.
There was a clear path of them wanting you to have that connection at some point. And unless you
Hmm.
hear the full breadth of these stories and like make those connections, it can sound really random when in hindsight, again, looking back, you can see how this was constructed all along. And it was a
Hmm.
pathway that they wanted you to go down. It was, you were guided there.
Hmm.
Whether you had any inclination of it or not, it was something that was sort of laid out in front of you and that ended up working out. And so
Hmm.
while you were going through all of this time, in the military and all this training that you were doing, do you remember any encounters with UAPs at that point of your life or with any type of craft or, going back to this disclosure movement and sort of making some connections? Do you remember advanced technology in those days too?
Prior to the Navy, when I was in high school, I went for my senior prom weekend out to Montauk. Now,
Okay, talk about that. Wow.
yeah, I mean, um, I don't know what prom is like for everyone else in the country, but in New York, it was a in New York in the mid '90s. It meant you were partying for the weekend. Prom weekend, you rent limousines, everybody gets all dressed up, and you just get annihilated. That was basically what we did. But that was the standard prom night. Then we had what was prom weekend. So me and a friend of mine, her name was Jen, we coordinated getting a rental house out in the Hither Hills campground area of Montauk. And we had planned a big party weekend in Montauk, which we did. We had a wonderful time, as much as teenage miscreants could have. But in that process, I mean, I'm not going to lie, were we drunk? Were we high? Yeah, absolutely. But these are things we did with great regularity. So I'm not going to bow to people saying, "Oh, it was because you were drunk. Oh, it was because you were stoned." Now, I've been drunk and stoned before and never seen the things that I saw this weekend. So, um, we had been partying on the beach, having a blast, and at some point, um, we noticed peculiar lights, like way out on the horizon of the ocean from the beach. I mean, that's distant. Um, but then we started to notice it was getting closer and closer and closer, like it was moving in. And then we were even calculating like that this must be going fast because it was way the hell over there back then, and now it's, um, I mean, like damn near it's almost on the beach. Like it went from way out there to like now we were freaking out. Like what is going on right now? And what we saw was like this massive flat thing that seemed to be like right over the water. Like in one thought, like we were, it almost seemed like a barge, like the way that it was like low and flat, but then it didn't really seem to be in the water as much as above the water. And then it was weird because like structurally, like it seemed kind of thin, like like it was just like a flat surface, like not even like a whole. It was almost like if you had like a floating basketball court. Like it was even like there was like lights above it shining down. So that's again made it very challenging at night to tell if the bottom of this thing was actually touching the ocean or not, because the lighting above it made such a contrast. But this thing, which we could also see people like walking around on top of it. It was almost like they saw us, we saw them. They were looking at us as this thing was approaching, and it kept getting closer and closer to the point of panic. Like this thing was coming to shore, and we were starting to be like, "What the hell is going on right now?" Um, and then, to be honest, like at the point where it looked like this thing was like about to hit land, I just woke up the next morning. I woke up the next morning on the beach and walked back to the house that we rented. And I just remember having conversations with folks. I was like, wow, wasn't that was nuts last night? Like, where did you go? Like, what happened? Like, and yeah, nobody thought much of it at the time other than like, wow, we were wasted. We had a great time last night.
Did anybody happen to like see you leave or have any, I guess,
I
touch?
did not leave, but there were conversations. I remember having conversations back then. I don't recall the specifics, but there were. I mean, I do remember straight up being like, "Why did you guys leave me on the
Right,
beach?"
yeah, because you were the only one there, right? There wasn't other people that lived
Yeah,
there with
yeah.
you.
When I
Yeah.
woke up, there was no one else there. So and then everybody just throws in their 2 cents of like, well, we weren't going to stay there all night and blah blah blah. Well, what do you remember about this? Well, I don't really remember.
And so everybody too was under the influence and having a good time. So there was that
Mhm.
element too where they
Plausible
might not have,
deniability to just wave it off as,
right. They were
did we
just
party too
having
hard?
fun and it didn't seem as serious as maybe it would have been if they were sober and had their whole mind their mind
Mhm.
on straight where they could like assess the situation and be like, wait a minute, this is kind of messed up what's happening. Like what is going on?
Mhm.
Do you have and
Mhm.
you have no memory of what happened during the night or at the moment when you possibly
I do
dissociated?
not.
Yeah.
I do not. I can currently recall what I would say was almost like the activities of the personnel, like if you were, bringing a boat ashore, like there's people towards the front end where this thing was getting closest to making contact, and it looked like they were making ready to, I guess you'd almost say disembark whatever it was that they were on to get onto the shore, is what it looked like.
And
And then
did you get a clear view at all of who or what was driving this craft?
no, but when you're saying the term clear, no, it wasn't clear. But it was good enough that, to my recollection, um, it just seemed like people,
Okay.
like it was close enough to tell that it was like, normal motions of people. Like it didn't seem out of the ordinary per se, except except that it made no sense what this thing was because it didn't, really have the features of a ship. I don't recall it having like a wake in the ocean. Um, yeah, it almost seemed like a parking lot was coming across the water. Like the way the lighting, like almost like a basketball court. Like in my brain, it looked like a lit up basketball court at night.
Interesting. And it was really
Like it's
flat
just
instead too.
flat.
Yeah.
What's that?
It was flat too.
It was flat, but it wasn't like it had much like depth to it. It was like this thin, flat thing coming over the surface that was illuminated.
That
It
would
had length and width than it did height, so to say, and it was not far above the water's surface. So, and um, it was moving in a way that almost seems like it had no contact with the water technically, because wasn't bobbing. It was this big flat thing that was just moving over the water. It was not um, subject to the wave activity.
Did it have any sound?
No, not to my knowledge.
Whoa.
Yeah, it
Does
didn't have
anybody,
sound.
was anybody that you were with, did they see this thing leave or anything, or did they just leave before it did?
I don't recall. I don't recall those conversations. I haven't spoken to those people in so long. I can vaguely remember that we had conversations the next morning about like, what was that? That was messed up. Like, why'd you leave me?
Yeah. And in your time, both in the military, I know that you weren't in the Air Force, so it wasn't like you were constantly dealing with craft, but just
Mhm.
in any disclosure movements or photos, or have you ever seen anything close that somebody else has disclosed or shown a photo of that looks similar to it? Or is this really
No, but
unique?
I felt like I heard a description one point
Yeah.
of somebody talking about some super massive flat thing, almost like a football field.
Okay.
Mhm.
Wow. I'd be curious if anybody has corroboration that's listening to this, if,
Mhm.
whether it's something that they've read or experienced.
Mhm.
Because I mean, if this exists, there has to have been other people that have seen it, so I'd
Oh,
be
totally. Yeah,
curious.
that's why I look at all of this stuff. I mean, yeah, I can't be the first person to have come across it.
Totally. So anybody, if you guys have any information or if you've seen articles or maybe you know the one that Eric's talking about, somebody else who's disclosed it, put it in the comments, or you can reach out to Eric on his website or on social media too, or email and share with him. I think all these are puzzle pieces and we can help connect some of these dots for each other. So reach out to him or me if you guys have some information on this. I'd love to hear if other people have experienced it themselves or if you guys know of somebody else out there that might have. It would be kind of cool to see other corroboration with this out there.
That'd
Um,
be
and so that is that kind of like the last time that you remember before getting to Antarctica.
advanced technology that wasn't, well, I guess it's unidentified, but even in that capacity, it still leads me to believe that it's something man-made.
Totally.
But I guess I would say, um, I guess the idea was technology there. I would say that throughout my career, I've been very fortunate to have the path that I walk be extremely peppered with advanced technology prior to most people, um, which is again just a peculiar thing from my perspective, right? As I seem to be very regularly shown technology before the average person. As an example, in my plumbing career, I remember working at a laboratory on Long Island where they were working on LCD TV screens when it was still in the complete research and development stage. It's just we were working in a laboratory. There were scientists. They had glass plates with the black liquid in between them. And we were there working on putting sinks and water lines in for other experiments. But they were explaining to us that there's a liquid crystal in between these glass screens, and we're working on making new TVs where the energy goes in and we electrify the liquid crystals so that you can get a display in the liquid crystals between the glass. And these guys were literally working on this right in front of me. And like, these are things that, I go and tell my friends, can you believe that, someday that these guys are working on, and, people would look at me like I'm a lunatic at the time, but
Oh,
this stuff happened to me every corner I turned. I was being shown new things that other people weren't seeing, or other high tech things. Um, One time I was at another customer's house, and very affluent community, but I wound up doing the service call for. I noticed he had all kinds of very interesting science stuff strewn about this laboratory area of his home. Long story short, through talking with the guy, he was He was the guy that invented the hologram sticker that went on that first episode of National Geographic where they had the hologram on the cover. This guy was the creator of that, and then he proceeds to start firing stuff up, and he's got laser beams and crystals and splitters, and he starts explaining to me holograms with a live representation right in front of me.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so
Mhm.
I want to get to that part two of your career because that also wasn't random and you did end up, the clientele that you had was very
Yeah.
obscure.
Yeah. There was a really nice documentary piece actually. I just put up about the strangeness of Long Island. And I went to Brooklyn recently. It's up on deciphering.tv where I'm working with folks trying to connect the dots on all of these weird things. One of the things that came up in the documentary, which it's still in hindsight so weird, one of my customers was Dr. Paul and the Paul Corporation, which was huge when it came to the Manhattan Project and such. So this is like there's just so many situations that I found myself in, and so many different brains that I have found myself in proximity to, where I can't help but think that, each of these steps I was meant to engage in certain conversations and pick up certain things and, get certain understandings. I mean, this can't be all coincidental that I was supposed to cross paths with all of these different walks of life that all certainly have very valued life experiences.
Anything else about the military that you think is important to share before we move on to what came next in your life?
I think I would just emphasize that at the time period that I was in proximity to the United States Navy, Los Angeles class submarines in particular, one of the phrases that I would hear with great regularity is that the Los Angeles class submarine is the greatest testament to man's overcoming of technology that almost no man will ever know about. These are things to consider. This is the environment these are the things, these are the steps that I took along the way. I used to sit at the train station in Hicksville, Long Island. I'd get Liberty for the weekend. I'm allowed to leave the base. There were times I would get off that train. It was an elevated station overlooking the greater Hicksville area of Long Island. And I remember sometimes I'd pause. I'd stay at the elevated spot. I'd sit on the bench. I'd have my sea bag and, just a traveling sailor. And I would look around and I'd breathe. Everybody would leave the elevated platform. The train would leave and it'd just be me sitting there. And I would pause and go, it just, it blew. I can look in any direction right now, and anybody that I make contact with has no idea what's really going on in the world.
Which is a
I
really
was like,
weird space to be in.
yeah, at 19 years old, 1994, and I'm realizing the vast majority of the population is very bamboozled as to what the activities are going on in the world around them.
That's so young to have that realization too, especially for what you went through. I think, you were already starting to come out of the other side of being a survivor at this point, and sort of like overcoming some of that mind control that you were under and like kind of breaking out and like seeing things for how it was versus
Mhm.
the constructed reality that most of society is still bought into being real.
Mhm. Yeah, I was starting to, I guess, pay attention to things seem to be way more complex than I previously understood. And I guess I was starting to be concerned with, I shouldn't say starting, I should say, I was starting to become aware of and concerned with, I could be getting deceived. That would have been about the time period in my life where I started to realize that um, things may not be as presented.
At that time, did you have conscious memories yet of any abuse in childhood, or was that still compartmentalized and just blocked out?
Some, I had some memories, but some were blocked out. And I think a lot of that had to do with dissociation, that certain events were worse than others. Certain ones stay in your memory banks as, well, that wasn't that bad that day. But the really bad stuff will move away.
Yes. That seems to be a common thing too. Sometimes I hate even like ranking abuse, but more of like the surface level abuse. Like maybe you were
Mhm.
yelled at home or physically
Mhm.
abused a little bit at home. Some of that starts to leak through, and like the really horrible stuff comes
Mhm.
out a little bit later after some of the initial stuff leaks out.
Yeah, I mean, because we also got to realize too the psyche of children that go through these things. I mean, there's certain beatings that I've took where in my brain I'm like, yeah, well, I deserve that one.
Yeah, you justify it.
Right. So it's like there's so many different levels to this. Um, yeah, it gets really weird really fast.
Yep. And if you went through something like absolutely horrible where it's kind of like on the brink of death, something like getting yelled at or maybe hit can seem like nothing. And you can justify that to being like, oh, well, that was nothing, like compared to what I have
Oh,
gone through, you
totally.
know? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Hmm.
Which is really sad, that this stuff becomes so normalized where even like going to boot camp, you were like laughing it off while everybody else is like trembling in their boots, trying to cope with like an adult yelling at them, another man yelling at them. And you're just like, come on, y'all, like, come on.
Yeah. Like that was a good one. That was great. You heard what he said about your mom? That was good.
And so talk about your journey going from this sort of submarine specialist and you're in the Navy to your plumbing career and kind of what came after that. What was that transition like for you?
Basically, yep, yeah, I had all the peculiar things that wound up going on in the submarine service. I wound up getting myself separated from that contract, getting back into the civilian world on Long Island. This would have been right around 1995 that I got into the plumbing industry and started dealing with, I mean, for lack of a better term, the military industrial corporation complex of the greater Long Island area, whether it be the actual facilities for manufacturing or the residential properties of the owners of those factions. And I just started to get into really close proximity to some really interesting folks that, are behind the scenes wealth, that are behind the scenes power. Um, One of the things I recall that happened often, big fancy mansions, big fancy bathrooms used to have magazine racks, built into the wall and stuff like that. This is how, things worked back in the day. And I can go to a customer's home and see in the master bathroom in the magazine rack they would have, Council on Foreign Relations Weekly or Trilateral Commission Monthly. And I started to look into, what is the Council on Foreign Relations? What's the Trilateral Commission? Why do so many of my customers have these magazines in their bathroom? And a lot of people may not know these organizations, how peculiar they are, how powerful they are, or how peculiar it is that, hey, I'm seeing one bathroom like this, let alone many. These are some heavy hitting sons of guns when it comes to global corruption. I mean, I don't know if you can have bigger think tank nefarious folks than folks from the CFR or the Trilateral Commission. I mean, I mean, what's next? Bilderberg Group? Oh, I worked for those facilities too. You know, yeah, in Glen Cove, Long Island, there was a facility in Glen Cove that hosted a Bilderberg event. That facility, now granted, the event occurred there before I was plumbing in the area, but effectively, when I started plumbing in that area, that property came under my client list, basically. That property was across the street from a property that was busted as one of the largest Soviet spy rings. It was a building right across the street from the Bilderberg facility. I did plumbing at both of the facilities.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought I remembered you saying before that you didn't even really advertise. You didn't go out and try to advertise to the specific clientele or really to anybody at all. You were almost getting referrals and this network sort of built itself.
In many ways, yes. So in the capacity that I was just mentioning, technically those two properties were on client lists for a company that I was directly employed at the time. But in my plumbing career, there have been times where I was directly employed by other companies. There have been times where I had my own thing going on, um, but across the board in any capacity. The very interesting thing about my plumbing career is I was a phone call away for access. I mean, all anybody had to do was figure out, who I worked for at the time, or it's just myself, and then they can just simply call me and say, I have a plumbing problem. I need you to come over and take a look as fast as possible. So I was very easy to get a hold of by any faction that wanted to either ask me a question or pass me information, because both of them happened with equal regularity.
And it
I would
sounds like,
oftentimes
go ahead.
be sent for um, under the pretense of doing a plumbing repair, but it would wind up being a conversation instead. Sometimes people were looking to get information. Sometimes people were looking to give information. I've experienced both of them in massive amounts. I would go to customers' houses on Long Island sometimes, and I mean, it was a total farce. Now everybody knows your cell phone listens to you, right? Everyone knows that now. Um, but in the early 2000s, I'd be having a conversation with a friend of mine in my basement, and all of a sudden the next day, I get a phone call to go to someone's house, and they have like almost a completely bogus plumbing call. Like, oh, my toilet's running. Can you take a look at it? Like, all right. There doesn't really seem to be anything the matter. But, okay, well, anyhow, while you're here, there's a pile of books on the table over there I think you might be interested in. And it'll be a bunch of books on the topic that I have been just discussing in the basement of my own home the day before.
What?
All this happened all the time. That happened all the time. I would just have people bring me to their home and give me books about a topic I had just engaged in for the first time the day before.
I think it's interesting too how even at these places that you were employed at, that you were
Mhm.
always the one that was sent to some of these, bigger, high, more elite like accounts and
Mhm.
clients to service, So even that, you can look at it like, well, I was employed there and they were on the books, but it was you
Mhm.
out of all the employees that they could have sent, that
Mhm.
they contracted you to do these accounts.
Mhm.
So it is really interesting. And even like you were just saying, going there and being handed information. Have you talked to other plumbers or is that common where you're in somebody's home and they want to just share anything with you or talk to you? Or is it typically the opposite?
It's not that common to
Yeah.
have that activity occur. I have spoken with other plumbers that I have worked with at these companies and these properties. And oddly enough, I have found out that in some of the properties that I went to, where I did not sign an NDA, apparently I've had coworkers that have worked in those facilities and they had to sign an NDA
Why do you think that is?
because I believe I'm on a different list. It's like going to TSA, right?
Yeah.
Um, some people are pre-approved. They have the TSA pre-check. Oh, we don't have to give you a pat down. You're good to go. So I feel like in some facilities, some of my coworkers still needed to sign an NDA, and I happened to be on the non-required list.
And that's so advantageous for you now because you can talk about these things openly, where if they had experienced anything that was kind of a red
Mhm.
flag, they can't. They have to conceal
Mhm.
that.
Correct. Yeah, a lot of people. That's one of the biggest criticisms that I get. People are like, he can't be saying the things. If he saw what he saw, they would have made him sign an NDA. Cool, speculative statement, but that's just someone else's opinion. Facts of the matter are, I didn't sign shit, and I can say whatever I want.
Do you remember any other obscure things that are important to your story or to any of these disclosure movements or anything that would be fascinating to share about that part of your
I,
life?
I was just thinking in regards to the books being put in my direction with great regularity. One of the things that I recall being interesting from those conversations that happened often, lots of times, the person giving me the books for whatever reason, right? This is deciphering my experience, looking back and trying to figure things out. They would oftentimes inform me that they worked at the light source, which this just goes back to like Long Island experience and paying attention to what's going on. The light source is the nuclear reactor at Brookhaven National Labs in Suffolk County, Long Island. They don't like to call it a nuclear reactor, though, because of the local people don't like that there's a nuclear reactor running on Long Island. So they stop calling it the reactor and they call it the light source. But a lot of these people that were giving me books would identify, I work over at BNL. I work at the light source. I'd say, okay. I'd take their books.
Do you remember, was there any books that people gave you twice or any themes that seemed to be common as if, it was kind of coordinated?
No, not in that capacity. I do not think that I received um, doubles on anything from those activities. Um, as far as a common theme, hell yeah, it was um, everything to do with consciousness.
How
You
bizarre.
know? Yeah, everything to do with consciousness and having a greater understanding of the energy of oneself, one's environment, the dynamic between the two. Yeah, everything's been in that vein, I guess you would say, is learning, like Tesla said, we need to study more on the energy of things than the matter of things. So I feel like in many ways, the people that I have crossed paths with have been putting in an effort to educate me in that direction. That it's the energy of things matters more than the matter of things.
Which also doesn't seem random because if you think about it's not like you're coming there to like do art where they'd be like, oh, this person's like might be into some like consciousness stuff or might be a little bit spiritual. Like your
Hmm.
job was like very like logical and almost like mathematical where there's like a
Hmm.
formula to fix something. So I think that that's really interesting that they would say, oh, there's a pile of books that I thought you would be interested in. Like you think that they'd be handing you books on maybe business or like really technical things.
Oh,
No.
no, the peculiarity of how oddball the topic was and how on point the book selection was was absurd. It was totally absurd.
What did you think about it? What were your
It
thoughts?
was mind-numbing. I had a good friend of mine that it happened so often. I mean, literally, my friend Joe was the guy I'd be sitting in the basement with, having these conversations with, and so many times I would call him the next day and be like, "Dude, you're never gonna believe this, but I just left the house. They called me for a toilet stoppage or whatever ridiculous thing," and he would be like, "Let me guess, you got another stack of books." And I'm like, "That's right." And he'd be like, "Dude, this is nuts." And I'd be like,
What are you up to?
"Yeah." As that was going on in real time, I was very aware of that things are super peculiar in that capacity. That was undeniable. As that was going on, that was trippy.
I would say so too, because
Mhm.
that was why I was asking if that's like common at all. Because there's certain professions like girls go get their hair and nails done, and like they like to talk to the
Mhm.
person doing it. But I would think plumbing would be more of a job where the worker is more isolated, and the person's like, "All right, go and clog my toilet. I'll be out here if you need anything." And it's not
Mhm.
necessarily something like a career path where somebody's like trying to engage with you the whole time that you're there and like wanting to share personal items with you and stuff. Like I think that that's a little bit unique to your story too.
It may be unique because I only know my own experience, and I can gather that what I knew of other plumbers is that they were probably way more standoffish. I don't doubt that. From my experience, my customers were around me constantly, super engaging. We had all kinds of dialogues. I took it as a benefit of my job to be able to engage people of all different walks of life and attempt to do my best to learn from their life experience to whatever extent they would share it. Now, yeah, I loved what I learned um, from being it's a very intimate environment. People, if you can get through the barriers at that point, they're very disarmed and they feel safe in their home field environment. You know, when you're working in someone's home, it's very intimate to them. It's their home. So if you can disarm them enough to engage, usually you can just open the freaking floodgates. You know, I would walk into people's homes. The first thing I paid attention to was where's their bookshelf? What books do they have? Where is their brain at? What's on their bookshelf that I can connect to and engage a conversation and start to be a bit disarming because I'm here in their house. I'm trying to sell them a repair. You know, they're having a bad day. They're in a tizzy. Where can I find some common ground right now?
And instead, they're giving you books and trying to do the same thing.
But and it would turn into that you know I
Yeah.
would find common ground. Next thing you know, I'd be engaged in these wonderful conversations while mitigating their plumbing dilemma for the day. And I think of it like being a bartender. It's like first, I had to convince them that I can rectify their immediate issue, which is the plumbing problem. For the bartender, it's I need a drink. So you get them a drink, and then you see. But basically, what wound up happening is once I would get into the throes of the repair, and they became confident that the dilemma that they hired me for was being mitigated, then they would pile on. You know, I got this other issue. Can I talk to you about? Like they start to realize that you're a fixer, and they'll throw any problem that they have at you and see if you can fix it. I did I did all kinds of psychological work as a plumber. I would show up to people's homes. They would hit me with everything under the sun in their life. And I had people that would full blown, I mean, they would try anything I told them. We had built a relationship and I had effectively helped them out with so many things before. Um, I've had customers where they called me and I couldn't believe how excited they were for me to show up, and it had nothing to do with their plumbing problem. Like they were waiting for something in their house to break plumbing wise so that I could show up and then they could hit me with the nine other things that they've been holding on to.
Wow.
Mhm.
That's really
I've had
fascinating.
people I've had people show up. I've showed up to people's homes where I've gone through the throes of, fixing their issues for them. But now I show up to do a repair first thing in the morning, and the lady has three other ladies in the house with her, and they're all sitting there having tea.
Oh
And
my
she's like,
gosh.
and I told him how you helped me with this, and I told him how you helped me with that. So now that do you mind? My friend has trouble with such and such. What do you think she should do? And I would just be working on, and I'd be like, well, if I was you, here's what I would, and then they would try what I tell them to try. And next time I see them, they're like, that worked out so good. Thank you for your advice.
Oh,
You know,
wow. But
yeah.
that also shows on your end. I mean, they were obviously, acting in obscure and peculiar ways, but it also shows your penmanship for being able to take a job that is typically a little bit more isolated and where the professional is a lot more standoffish. And like
Mhm.
you sort of embraced it and created like a really, I think, creative customer service aspect to it where you made people feel confident having you in their homes and like they felt comfortable having conversations with you and like bringing you into their family sort of, which I don't think, I mean, just in my opinion, like home repair isn't necessarily, those people aren't usually the people that a family will invite to their Christmas dinner, but I could see that being the opposite with you, where these were people who really held you in high esteem and like looked forward to seeing you and like were engaged with you. And I think
Mhm.
that's also really neat on your end how you did that. I think we can learn a lot from that in general of, being able to just be a good person and to help people feel safe around us.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, I do think that I did well in my career to be engaging to the client and provide them a fair service. I would tell people all the time, I'm not a salesman, I'm a serviceman. I'm offering you a service. You don't have to like it, you don't have to take it. There's no gun to your head, but you called. This is the service that I'm offering. If seems, amicable, I'll start slinging tools and move forwards. If I would tell people all the time, if you don't trust me, you should throw me out of your house immediately. The split second, if you are lacking trust, I don't even want to be in your house right now. I don't want to put you off. I guess some people can be afraid. Some people don't like straight. I get all of that stuff. I'm not looking to put anybody in a peculiar situation. I've said to people before, if we're gonna boil this all down to, I'm a stranger in your house. If you don't trust me, I should just leave right now. You should find someone that you trust, and we'll just call it a day. Because I'm certainly not here to force a service on you or attempt to sell you anything. You got something broken, you want me to fix it. If you think I'm the guy, I'm the guy. If you think there's someone else, we should get a hold of them immediately.
Absolutely. And so
Mhm.
let's talk about how this eventually led to you again having an encounter with Raytheon, and let's start going down that part
Mhm.
of your story, and obviously that leading to Antarctica.
Mhm. Oh, well, I guess basically it started out with the Obama administration slaughtering the economy in around 2008, 2009, which was a time period that I was self-employed, running and gunning. And then at that point, I had to start looking for other work since the greater Long Island area was in very much a valley of economical forces. So I started looking into other jobs, and I wound up having the Antarctic program get on my radar, and I started looking into it. And the hiring contractor at the time was Raytheon Polar Services, and it certainly did give me pause. I mean, I couldn't negate what my experiences had been with Raytheon up until that point throughout my life. So it was super peculiar to me that Raytheon was providing these services down there. But I moved forwards with the process. I wound up getting hired, and then I just went down there with my eyes and ears open, but my mouth shut, just to absorb, just do the job, pay attention. Sure, you're going to see weird stuff. Um, it's Raytheon. It's a remote location. It's government contracts. This is to me, it was almost inevitable that I came out of there learning something that someone else wasn't paying attention to, because it's just kind of my career. As I look at facilities and systems differently than other people. I have different eyes and understanding. Other people walk into a building, they're not paying attention to the diameter of the pipe on the fire suppression system. They're not paying attention to how many outlets are spaced out on the wall. Like, these are all code things that are indicative of other things. Um, Stupid little details, but as an example, fire sprinkler system piping diameter is indicative of how many heads are on the system. So you can walk in one hallway and um, the bigger the pipe is, you're at the front end of the system. And as you get further out, each of the piping diameters will start to become more minuscule because you're not flowing as much. But then there's certain ways of looking at a building where you can start looking and seeing, like, wow, there's a ridiculous amount of fire suppression available for this building that other people just walk around underneath and never have a clue. But there's just little nuances to constructions and facilities and maintenance that afford you a bigger understanding of the world around us. Infrastructure, utilities, power supply, redundant power supply, the ability to move air in and out of a building, water in, waste out. This is infrastructure. This is what makes the world go round. And if people have an aptitude to pay attention to, it's like these games, like, what's different in this picture from this picture? What makes this building different from this building? Oh, well, this one has a standard power supply going into it. Oh, this one has a gigawatt meter on the side. Did anyone ever notice that? Why does this one building have enough power for a whole city?
That's really fascinating. And it's stuff that the normal layperson who doesn't have or isn't privy to understanding that, they'd never look twice at things like that. That would be kind
Hmm.
of like the last thing somebody would look at as they're walking through an establishment or a facility.
Hmm.
So that's
Hmm.
neat that you were able to like gather so much information just from these skills that you had that are seemingly like the way that you explain it, like once you know it, it seems really simple to look at and to for things to be really obvious, but it's not like that for most people. And so
Right.
when you were going to start, or rather, as you were signing a contract for them, what was that period like for you? Like, did they go through like a big interview process? And then how soon after they contracted you did you go to Antarctica?
Oh, that's a great question. The process was a bit extended. The first season that I attempted to go, I did not make it in my first effort. There's a massive psychological evaluation process to have to winter over at the South Pole. I lived in New York. I was being flown back and forth from New York to Centennial, Colorado for psychological evaluations, for interviews, for medical things. So the first time I went to Centennial, Colorado for, I think they call it the Minnesota Multiphasic Psychological Evaluation. It is hundreds of multiple choice questions, hundreds and hundreds of them. It's a test from like the 1950s. It's really ridiculous. They say that it's a filter to see if you can handle things psychologically wintering at the South Pole. I thumb my nose at that. It's a lie. There is no filter to know if you can make it or not. What it is it's to get a baseline reference of your psyche before you go there so they can address changes. Because there's no, you can't, it's like saying, well, we're going to give you a test to see if you can make it on the moon. Have you been to the moon? No. Has the test been to the moon? How does anybody in this equation know whether I can make it on the moon? No one else has been to the moon, but you're going to tell me if I can make it on the moon. Like, come on. Like, so this is the silly stuff. But regardless, I went to take this test, and very shortly after starting the multiple choice part, I got pulled out to go for a one-on-one interview with a psychologist. And the idea is they're supposed to, you know, go over some of the multiple choice stuff. And I was already finding this laughable because I'm like, I didn't even answer any of these questions yet. I didn't even have any time to review this. Like, how can this even be a reasonable evaluation at this point? This seems ridiculous to me. But regardless, he starts engaging with questions. And again, like I am on guard because there's Raytheon involved. And, and I was in the submarine service, and there was things we're not supposed to say about the submarine services. And here I am with Raytheon. So I am cautious that I feel like this could be a setup just to see if I leak submarine service info. But anyhow, this guy's going through and he's asking me questions and he says to me, he goes, have you ever considered homicide before? And I just went, that depends on if you pass or fail me. And he got so
The
mad.
same guy who went to the Navy recruitment office high with his friend, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You always infuse the humor into it.
This guy he did not think I was kidding at all. He did not find it funny at all.
No.
He took it as an actual threat.
Gosh.
And I was like, come on, like cut it. Like I was kidding. I'm
You
not gonna
failed
kill
the
you.
psychological exam.
Don't threaten to kill your psychological evaluator.
How do you not laugh at that? I'm sorry, but that's clearly like a joke.
I thought it was great. I crushed it on timing. I was right up on him. I, yeah. Have you ever considered homicide? That depends on if you pass or fail me.
Fail.
Yeah.
And so is that your first time taking it and then you didn't end up making it, or did they still pass
I
you?
did not. Um, I don't know if they ever officially gave me results of that exam. But what I can tell you is I was not selected for the program that year.
Were you so what happened next? Did you have to go through all of that again, or did
Then
they?
I had to go through all of those motions again for the next season.
Yeah.
And then I wound up not threatening to kill my evaluator. And then they let me in.
Which is actually funny because they're like
This
basing
time
it.
I brought him a coffee and was like, hey, buddy, sorry about last time.
It was a
There's
joke.
no
Just
poison
kidding.
in that coffee, I'm pretty sure.
And so when did you go to Antarctica? Was that immediate or was there some
That
time?
was so that hire on that I probably got hired on, that was most likely probably November, December of, I guess that would be 2009, most likely, that I started the hire on process again.
Okay.
Then I started going through some training and connections and things like that into the summer of 2010. Probably that would have been like July and August back over in Colorado. Um, we did Wilderness Medicine Institute, Knowles, first responder training, wilderness medicine responder, that type of stuff. Basically, how to assess and package people up if you're injured out in the middle of nowhere. You know, anything that goes wrong, how do you patch someone up? How do you package them? And how do you get them back to help? So we did training for that. We did team training for the fire brigade stuff. And then we were also trained, um, I guess you would say, in psychological observations, assessments, and mitigating practices for stressed out coworkers. You know, we're going to be a year with each other. You got to learn to figure things out. You have to have some wherewithal to appreciate when one of your team members is having a bad day, you know, and to be on the lookout to help from allowing people to get too low, and then be able to, you know, extend a helping hand and get people back up to a better state of mental preparedness. I mean, I can only begin to attest to doing a year at the South Pole, including a winter, is very taxing physically and mentally. So they were aware of that, and they were doing their best to train us up on how to be a good assistant to a coworker having a bad day.
Wow. Oh my goodness. So what was that like for you getting started with this? Had you done work prior to what they wanted you to do? Was this like a whole sort of like new realm, or was this pretty easy for you to start getting acquainted with?
Um, it was a whole new world, technically. I can't, I mean, the job, right? The tool slinging, um, to me, was the coolest challenge ever. I'm very good with my tools and my skills. Um, this was an environment that was very good at testing that skill set. So I loved the challenge of the workload and trying to figure out how to get things done in the harshest of environments where everything is the hardest way to do everything. Like anything that goes wrong is the worst thing that can go wrong. Anything that breaks, it breaks in the worst way possible, under the worst of conditions, and mitigating the problem is super challenging. I loved every bit of that. That's what I do. Um, the environment couldn't have been anything more foreign to me. Having done my entirety of my plumbing career up until that point, um, was in the greater New York area. Different type of folks from what I was now dealing with. Raytheon had an HR department. Not something, not something I'm familiar with working in proximity to. Plumbers and HR departments don't get along so well.
That's funny.
Uh, yeah, so it was a whole learning curve for me to be thrown into uh, this snake pit of bureaucracy, inefficiency. Um, I call it not-for-profit work. You know, this government stuff. A lot of these things that I've found myself involved with, like for me, for profit work is, you know, I come to your house, you have a problem. I have to sell you a repair. I have to sell you on the confidence that I'm the guy that can do it. I have to do the repair. I have to warranty the repair. I have to be able to smile and whistle Dixie the whole time I'm in your house. That's for profit work. You got to collect at the end of the day. You have to perform qualified repair. All of these things have to occur. And this is not-for-profit work. You don't have to sell anybody on anything. You don't necessarily have to do a great job. And who's going to know who did what and warranty anything? So I found that I had now found myself for the first time ever, and what I was learning was the not-for-profit aspect of trade work, which was a whole different demon. So I had high expectations of doing excellent work, but finding myself in the bureaucracy and red tape of the inefficiency of a non-governmental organizational third-party contractor operating at the behest of the National Science Foundation.
And from what you've said before, this whole um I guess job that you were working and everybody there, it was very compartmentalized and you had a really unique position where you were given access to sort of the big picture and everything, where everybody
Mhm.
else was sort of isolated to one part of this where you got to see everything.
Completely true. And I think that South Pole Station was a wonderful microcosm of that, but the world is a macrocosm of that. This goes back to like what I was saying with tool slinging and having an understanding of things. Um, right now, plumbers have access to more parts of the world than non-plumbers.
That
I
is a
mean,
crazy fact.
it's a current state of reality. Plumbers can get into more rooms and spots on this planet than a non-plumber can. So right off the bat, it's a standard that, plumbers have more access to see things than the average Joe Schmo. That carried over to this facility. There's a lot of people that were in the facility that had a room that they're assigned to. Does that mean that all the other rooms are locked and there's signs up that say top secret and don't on it? No, because you don't need to do that when you just simply like, hey, Emma, here's your office, here's your computer, here's where you work. It's just need to know stuff at that point. You need to know that that's your office and that's your desk and this is your terminal. This is where you work. So the thought doesn't really cross your mind to go into every other room and find out what's going on because there's no need. So my world is different because I don't get an office per se in the facility. I don't get a terminal. You don't get your own office. You're a loser. You're a plumber. You have to go to the computer lab and access one of 20 computers to do your work on because you don't get an office and you're not allowed to have stuff or do stuff. And it's like, well, hold on a second. That's one way to look at it. The other way is I have access to the whole facility and you don't.
That is really interesting. And I think that's too why people are so easy to discredit your story because there wasn't really a lot, if anybody, there that had that same opportunity that you did. So the people that were actually there with you, they got to see one little part of this operation where you got to see everything, and a lot of these people probably were very, or I should say, had a lot of cognitive dissonance to what
Mhm.
you were saying because of the compartmentalization.
Yeah, and even worse, I've even had people reach out to me claiming they were from the program, had been at South Pole, and that I'm full of garbage, and that there's no locks on any doors. Like this is the extent of it, right? So I've had people reach out to me and make these types of claims. Eric, you're full of crap. Blah 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 blah. You got to prove this. You got to prove. There's no locks on the doors. I said the EPP, the emergency power plant, had a lock on the door. You're telling me there's no locks on any doors, and you were there. You went into the EPP, the emergency power plant had a lock on the door because there was key sets and things right up next to the door to basically log in and log out. Not only did the door lock, it was such a precarious environment that we were supposed to hang your key up on a particular thing so that anybody walking by knows whether or not somebody's in the EPP. And then these people back up because it's like, don't come at me and tell me there's no locked doors. I was there too. You're claiming to have been there, apparently to try to take the wind out of my sails. But by all means, let's engage and find out what you know. Oh, so you knew there were locked doors.
And so talk about how you not necessarily stumbled on because I know that they let you see the technology that you saw, but talk about how you ended up being exposed to that, and share a little bit about it for people who are newer to your story. And obviously, this is a big part of what the world needs to know is that this stuff exists.
Mm-hmm. On one particular day, in regards to a system referred to as the ELF, that's a system that I had direct firsthand experience in ascertaining that the system was not de-energized and defunct, but it was actually operating. So on a particular day, I had to do a repair, which would have required me to swap out a fuel pump. This was a big deal at the time because the type of fuel that we use is 100% volatile. It can explode. It can catch fire. It's bad stuff. So to swap out this fuel pump and change the power, there's concerns between fumes in the air, sparks, fire. This is the job. A lot of people say, why would a plumber be touching electrical? Because it's on a pump that I'm swapping out. Like, come on. Um, so long story short, I got involved with the electrical panel and found out that the circuit that I was trying to trace back to that pump was questionably labeled, and some of the other switches in the sub panel didn't also seem to match the reality that I was looking at. So I had to get involved with my chain of command and get some clarification as to what circuits were what's energized, what's de-energized, help me remove some of the confusion here. I'm lost, was basically the angle that I was coming from. And then in that process, I wound up learning that one of the circuits that I believed was supposed to be off, which was labeled for the ELF system, was actually energized and supposed to be energized because apparently it's not off. Like we had been lied to. And I was at that moment privy to this system is completely up and operating. And they know it, and now I know that it's up and running. And now they know that I know.
And so, what did you end up learning about this system? What
Oh,
did
the ELF. I mean, there's so much research that can be done on extreme low frequency systems. And this brings us right back into the conversation of directed energy weapons. For all practical purposes, let's just say they can do anything that we can think of until we prove otherwise. That seems to be the problem, is that everybody tries to want to whittle it down to like, well, what's the problem? The problem is super huge and super complex. Directed energy weapons are a massive dilemma. So I don't want to try to reduce this down to a limited list of concerns. Um, let's just call it directed energy weapons to leave the full umbrella open with everything else underneath for everybody else to research. ELF systems are one of the many systems that fit the category of directed energy weapons systems. I found at that point in time, this one's up and running and on. So we have weather modification is on the list of things that can occur from directed energy weapons. Mind manipulation is things that can be caused by directed energy weapons. Um, Long range communications can be directed energy weapons. Um, yeah, global attack on technologies can be accomplished through directed energy weapons. It's a level of dominance and variety that's manifold, that so many people, this is what I'm trying to bring to people is more for them to come up with questions about the information that I'm putting out there than to try to pretend that my information gives them the answers, because it doesn't. My information is not the end of the road, it's the start of the conversation. Directed energy weapons are a massively problematic technology that is on the playing field contemporarily and being wielded by many factions. That's what I'm bringing to the table, not precisely how this cog in the machine turns, not precisely what are their motives, not precisely, this is everything that we have to do to stop them. I'm more like Paul Revere in the disclosure community. I'm just running around like a lunatic trying to give people warning. The British are coming. The directed energy weapons exist. Same difference. I can't tell you what to do about the British. I can't tell you what to do about all the directed energy weapons, but it'd be very irresponsible for me to be aware and not say anything.
Were you made privy to anything that they were using them for during your time there, or was that all information that was kept from you and you only knew that they were on and working?
I only knew that they were on and working. The information was certainly compartmentalized so that it was not immediately available information, but it was through further research, communication, connecting the dots after my time at the South Pole Station that I was able to come to the conclusion of what was really going on and then start trying to work to get that information out publicly.
Was there any instances while you were there where you questioned it to anybody that worked there or tried to inquire, or did you kind of keep that to yourself and keep silent about it until you left?
We would make jokes and cast aspersions, I guess you would say. There was a large amount of German people at the facility. So in the grand scheme of, like Operation High Jump and Nazis and World War II and New Schwabenland, we would make jokes regularly that, if a whole batch of German scientists walk by, like we would turn to each other and be like, at least it's nice that they don't make them wear the uniforms anymore. Like as if they were still Nazis trying to take over the world. So that was just a big joke that would go on. I would tease the scientists, like sometimes I would just be walking by the table where all the German scientists were eating at, and they'd all be, bantering back and forth, and I would stop and look at them, and I'd be like, I don't know. Still sounds to me like you guys are plotting to take over the world. And they would pause and they would look at me. And then they would all laugh and they would say, like, how do you know we are not?
I was gonna say you probably weren't too far from the truth, honestly, with some of those
I
comments.
might have nailed them dead to rights at the moment. Who knows? We will use the ice cube neutrino detector in transmit mode. Take over the world.
And so at this job, were you, I'm assuming that there was maybe some types of restrictions on what you can and can't talk about, but were there? Did you have to sign an NDA for this job or just no, nothing?
No, for the South Pole job,
Yeah.
absolutely nothing.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, yeah. There was no NDA. They had what was it? Um, intellectual. What the hell is that thing they did? Intellectual property. They pulled some shenanigans with that. It's just like a standard corporate, almost like it was like a whole bunch of legalese mumbo jumbo that basically was Raytheon trying to be like, if you ever come up with a good idea, this goes to show how screwed up Raytheon is. The devil incarnate in corporate form. So Raytheon did have us sign like some intellectual property thing, where it's almost like they were trying to word it so that like theoretically, after you leave South Pole Station, if you ever come up with any good idea and you ever make a nickel doing anything ever, what we're going to do is claim that you figured that out while you were at South Pole Station, which means you owe us a part of whatever you ever accomplish. It was the most insane thing that I've ever seen. Yeah, it was intellectual property form that they were going to effectively they were letting you know that like if you ever come up with anything really cool in the future, we're totally going to try to say that like you owe us.
No way.
Yeah, yeah.
So how long were you there at that job at the South Pole?
I was there from November of 2010 until November of 2011. And if my memory serves me correctly, I did 366 days straight in Antarctica.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Did you, after learning about some of this, I'm assuming that you started your research while you were there, being curious and, wanting to learn what it was that you were seeing. Did you start to feel like nervous or I don't want to say afraid because I feel like you're super fearless, but did any of that worry you after you started to learn like what you were around and like realized what was there?
Um, I guess you would say there were times that I didn't even really think about it. Like I think when I first left, I think I was just so excited to be out of there, that I almost didn't even want to like just even think about it. Um, but I did, I mean, I had my eyes open to stuff. I did start to connect more dots with what was going on in the world. And then I started to meet more new weird people that started to make more things connect. So it was like almost again like the guiding hand of, have you ever thought of this? And oh, you've done that before, but did you ever think like, and it was like, whoa, things would start to connect. So I guess questions started to be forming in my head. And then I also, I guess, started to retrospectively start paying attention to the peculiar path that I walked. Um, like you were saying earlier, I should probably write a book. That's something a lot of people have said to me, right? I sit around and hang out with people, we swap stories, share drinks, life is fun, right? But in that process, what winds up always happening is in a short period of time, people start looking at me funny with all the interesting stories. And they're like, how did you do all, like, you should write a book. You're like Forrest Gump, like you've done all this weird stuff. And I don't really have much of an argument against that technically. But what winds up happening is um, I didn't really know how to connect all the dots myself. So it was like this whole idea of writing a book to me, even though I need to do it, it's like in retrospect, I start looking at like, where do I even begin to do that? Like, where does this book start? Where does this book finish? What's the plot of this book? Because I'm just looking around and it just looks like lunacy to me. How did, how did all this stuff happen? What's the plot line? Who's important? What does this need to be a chapter? Does that need to be a chapter? Like this is it's a very big picture that I found myself in the middle of. And I'm spending years publicly. I started my YouTube channel initially it was called Deciphering My Experience. Um, because I didn't know where to begin to write a book. So I just started doing it in real time. Like, all right, um, people say the information that I have is of value. I can't argue that. Um, but what I could say is that, um, I don't have 5 years to figure out how to write a book to make it digestible, to connect all the dots to every single person's level of contentment. I just look at it as like the truth is very important. The truth is going to matter to the people that need to know the truth. Um, my life is not going to be negatively impacted if some knucklehead wants to be a naysayer and say, hacker's full of beans. Whatever, guy. Like, it's, good luck proving that. So to me, it just looked like, why wait? Why not just jump right into the arena of getting the truth out, find where that arena is, find who the champions are for truth. Um, so I kind of got involved with that, but I think that's currently where I'm at right now is trying to fend off the foes of the truth while trying to align with those that are champions for the cause. And that's pretty challenging. The community is full of con jobs and charlatans of every variety. A couple of lunatics here and there, but it's just that's what I'm trying to do is just get this truth out there. I do got to get a book written at some point, like we were saying. Um, but yeah, I mean, where to begin? Where to end? What's
At
the
what
meat and
point in this
potatoes?
journey did you start connecting this journey that you went on as an adult and putting all those pieces together to, oh my gosh, but then look what I went through as a child. When did all that start to converge as you were doing some internal investigations and reflecting?
Yeah, so basically, in regards to when I guess I would say I started putting connections together with things going on from my adulthood to my childhood, would be in the I guess the time frame that I started doing research and coming across things like remote viewing in the Monroe Institute, reading the book "Stalking the Wild Pendulum" by Itzhak Bentov, which is a book that is heartily utilized by the program to work with remote viewers, or what now people are seeing in the news media as psychic assets. So this is just what I was learning was things that I had in my memory banks in my youth that made no sense to me were now making sense to me, where in my adult position I was learning what these protocols were, that I had been pushed through, that in my youth nobody had communicated to me exactly what was going on. So it just took pure chance, I guess, that happenstance, that I came across information that explained things that I couldn't make sense of up until that point.
Had you had, I guess, recovered memories of like abuse and stuff until then? Did you get like a flood of memories at any point where you were like, whoa, this was way more extreme than what I thought it was?
There was a bit more stuff that had come back, not tons. Um, Yeah, it's very interesting doing those what I call energy work. Is just working with folks. Everybody seems to have a different title for what they do. So I apologize, I can't think of all the right titles for all of the right people. So I use the umbrella term energy workers. Some people are very skilled at it. Some people need to practice more. But it's just like everything in life. You have to do your due diligence to see if you can find a good auto mechanic also. But I've
100%.
I've worked with energy workers, and I have certainly done things that people would call like regressions, hypnosis, past life reading, all of these things. I'm very open-minded to everything, but I'm very practical when it comes to results. So some people, very talented, and they've been very helpful to me in my learning process, mending process, healing process. But yeah, it's a interesting path, and the energy work I do believe has value, even though some people need more practice.
Totally, yeah. And sort of depending too on where the victim or survivor, whoever's getting the treatment, kind of where they are in their healing too. Because some of that stuff
Hmm.
can be a little bit destabilizing if you're not like ready for
Yeah,
it, which you
yeah. I can
were,
I can definitely say in
you were very
hindsight that
ready.
there's only certain stuff you can take at certain times, which is or should, maybe, I don't know. I guess everybody seems to be able to take whatever comes at them whenever it happens. But boy, dude, the question of do they really deserve all of that all at once?
I know. I can't even imagine,
Uh-huh.
thinking that your life was one way, or at least having the impression that it was like somewhat normal-ish, just maybe some weird things here and there,
Hmm.
and then putting together such a big puzzle over so many years, kind of all at once, and having that conversion or convergence of holy crap, like nothing was as happenstance or random as I thought. Like there was sort of a system
Yeah.
that my life followed, and there was an organization to it, and there
Hmm.
were handlers and like things that pushed me there.
It seems
Was that
way
was that
more.
really hard for you, or did you deal with that pretty good?
I guess I dealt with it pretty well, because it was like I was becoming cognizant of something that it already occurred. Like it already happened. So it was just like really, I think it was mind opening to just, um, I guess, in a way, connect the dots for myself at the very least, um, to make some semblance of justification for why all of these things did occur. Is that apparently there's some appropriate path I'm supposed to be on. you know. So whether or not I agree with it, it just seems to be, from my perspective, uh, something that somebody, some faction, multiple, I have no idea, but somebody sure seems to be tending to that path.
Totally. And so let's talk about your path from there, being somebody who wasn't recognized by the public, putting all these pieces together for your life. How did that evolve into, I'm going to be a whistleblower. I'm going to start sharing this publicly.
I guess when I really kind of crossed the bridge into the understanding of directed energy weapons systems, whatever anybody's comfortable term is, and I started to realize that the average person on this planet, which is a lot of people, are negatively impacted by technologies that they don't even know exist. And that to me just seemed so wrong. It's like, in a way, it's like, I think of it, it's like walking into a, it's really weird. It's like walking into a dark room, getting punched in the face a bunch. You have no idea who's doing it, but technically, somehow, you also don't know you're getting punched in the face. Like you're accumulating the damage. You don't see who's doing it. So to me, it just seemed terribly wrong on so many levels what these new monopolized technologies seem to be actively accomplishing. And we, the people, because we're not aware that the technologies exist, nobody has to admit to their being around. So these systems in their existing state are currently unregulated. That's the benefit of what's going on right now is people, if they had these technologies, they'd just be selling them to us because, then they can make money. Or they can just make tons of money monopolizing the technology in its unregulated state.
Totally.
You
And
know?
so where did you start with this? Because your testimony actually made it to the Senate Intelligence Committee and Arrow. Is that sort of a direction that happened really quickly for you, or how did you end up getting your testimony heard on such a high level?
It did not happen quickly. And I guess I could say the only reason that it happened on such a high level is I keep trudging through the front lines of disclosure and trying to find who's friend and foe. And sometimes I make a great connection, sometimes I flounder, but either way, I just keep making um, connections and corrections and trying to get as much truth of what I know from my experience out to the people. Just because, we the people for the people type stuff is just the way my brain works. Um, make good neighbors, make good neighborhoods. A lot of things have changed in our society, from intrusion of technology. And that's the stuff that we have in our hands, that we use on a day to day basis, um, with some semblance of our approval as to how far these devices intrude. But now we're talking about a level of technology that's remotely located, and it can, transmit to or receive information from at great distance, and we're kind of just in the crosshairs of this stuff. We the people are caught in modern warfare that's just at a level that folks will really have a hard time comprehending what the modern weapons of warfare are. Not someone like yourself. I mean, I know that you've been delving into this and MK Ultra mind. I mean, you start talking mind control, people think you're a lunatic. Oh, you think they're going to control our minds? How about let's just say heavily manipulate and modify? How about to be so suggestive?
Totally. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting how language has impacted people and how Hollywood movies, the different propaganda pieces that they've put out, how
Mm-hmm.
it's really changed people to not accept things that
Mm-hmm.
should be very obvious. Like a lot of the stuff that you're talking about, that others have talked about, there is official documentation to some level or degree out there that people
Mm-hmm.
can find on a quick Google search. Even MK Ultra, people are like, that's a conspiracy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's actual physical documentation by the CIA out there that has it.
Mm-hmm.
Like whether or not you believe it happened now, to write it off and say it never happened,
Mm-hmm.
you're 100% wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I totally agree with you about the directed energy weapons too. That's something I deal a lot with, is people saying that specifically, how do you prove it? Well, like for one, you can look right in your own home. Most of us have 5G that we're, whether it's coming from
Mm-hmm.
in Wi-Fi, a lot of that is very near and dear to us in
Mm-hmm.
our cities and towns and right in our very homes, and there's physical documentation that you can find on that too, on
Mm-hmm.
negative side effects. Whether or
Mm-hmm.
not they say it's proven to happen, there's warnings, may cause this, it could impact this.
Mm-hmm.
Like there is stuff out there, and then there's scientists and different reporters and researchers that have been documenting, and sharing the negative side effects
Mm-hmm.
of these different technologies. So to not believe that there's a greater source of that we don't know about, and we know already that the stuff that they have introduced to us is
Mm-hmm.
pretty dangerous. Like it shouldn't go above anybody's mind that there's other things, and that the that their goal is to make it so they can have a war without weapons. So we are attacked and don't know it. We don't know how to defend ourselves. We're caught off guard. And these weapons can be extremely destabilizing for people that I know that have been directly attacked from some type of energy weapon. They believe that that's what happened to them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this can be extremely destabilizing for people and impact their health. And you hear about Havana syndrome and
Mm-hmm.
the different ways that technology can really wreak havoc on our bodies, you know? And so on your end, having been obviously somebody that discovered this, going into whistleblowing, what do you think is the most important thing for society to know about this? And are there ways that people can help contribute? I mean, like how do we bring enough awareness to this and then ultimately stop, this targeting that's happening pretty much on a global level?
I think communication is one of the first things we always need to consider whenever we find ourselves in an emergency circumstance. So this is one of those. People need to really start engaging this topic with more people, so we can bring up the level of awareness, because what I'm seeing right now in the media appears to be a very hard push from, at the very least, the federal government for the United States of America to try to commandeer the topic of disclosure in general, which covers these mind control weapons, these psionic abilities, what they have to do to integrate with modern technology. And I just caution folks that you may want to not consider the information that the people that have been lying to you for many decades are now putting out as what they're calling the truth, and suggesting we should trust them now. So to me, I find everything that's going on right now, on all of these topics, very peculiar. I find the people giving testimony thoroughly questionable. So yeah, it's just one of these weird things that's going on right now. There's a lot happening, and there's a lot of information coming out. As I'm sure you've seen, Emma, with the folks recently on News Nation with Ross Coulthart. Everybody's talking about psionics and the GATE program, and everybody's bringing this into the conversation. It just seems peculiar to me that we went from no one talking about it to a collaborative effort. And I actually just saw a video where Jake Barber was on with, oh geez, I can't think of the other gentleman's name, Jesse Michaels, I believe. Barber straight up stated that he had gone to Washington D.C., the Greer event that I spoke at. He stated that he was with the federal government at the time on an operation of some sort to look into making arrests of whistleblowers for people getting information out incorrectly, unauthorized dissemination. So there's a lot of weird stuff going on right now. I find it highly peculiar that somebody who was sent to investigate one aspect of a conversation to be to its detriment as an original process is now all of a sudden, just miraculously on our side.
That is really fascinating.
Hmm.
And that's also fascinating that you were at that event as well,
Hmm.
seeing as though what you were saying earlier about, a lot of their testimony had a lot of similarities to yours too.
Hmm. Yeah, it's the weirdest thing. So to me, in a way, I feel like it's one of these operations that we've heard so many other folks testify to how they work, which is that it appears to me that the information they're putting out is a patchwork of truths from a whole bunch of other people that testified. The con job here is that these stories have anything to do with these folks disseminating the information currently. Another thing that was brought up in the testimony that I saw Mr. Barber giving to Jesse was that they were working with Arrow at one point. So it really seems to me like there's a high probability that they just had access to all of Arrow's files. They pilfered out a whole bunch of the information. Was like, here, you say this part, you say this part. We'll all corroborate each other's stuff. Make sure you tap on the Gate project. Make sure you say that we absolutely do not have this technology. It's not possible that it's us.
100%,
Yeah.
yes. And as far as like you disclosing and obviously there's other whistleblowers to different degrees that are coming forth and expressing concern about this. Do you feel like it's being taken seriously? I mean, after you testified, did there seem to be an effort at all of like helping commandeer taking care of this? Or are you seeing sort of a suppression of it of, okay, like we got it this far, how do we shut these people up and like make sure it's never heard again?
I think the funniest thing is that I'm seeing that it's being taken very seriously by the wrong people, which would be the bad guys that are apparently working hard to invest copious amounts of money and put together crack teams of disinfo to try to come in and commandeer the topic again. It seems like there's a very concerted effort for the federal government to do some standard CYA activities right now.
Interesting. And in your opinion, because this is really damaging, have you come across or do you have any recommendations on ways people can protect themselves from this affecting them?
Um, yeah, I guess the standard response I have for that one, which is, well, I guess you almost said like, in a way you implied like, is there an easy way to do it, I guess, but I only know um, the concept I would throw out there that people need to become very familiar with is know thyself. You have to learn to know thyself. Um, the technology that's being wielded today, I apologize, folks. This is all new to everybody, so we don't have a common vocabulary or vernacular. So I'm gonna do my best to use the words that I choose to describe something here. The problem we have with the technology that's currently being wielded globally is that it can do what appears to be intrusive thoughts. So it would be like right now if Emma just simply asked me a question and was like, hey, Eric, we're going to go out to dinner tonight. Where would you like to go to eat? And in my head, I start thinking of all the different things. And it's like a conversation that I'm having with myself about where I would like to go to eat tonight. But effectively, if Emma has a machine and she can now interject into that conversation in my head. And meanwhile, I'm sitting here thinking, bacon cheeseburgers, barbecue. But if she wants sushi, if she technically had a machine that made it sound like me in that conversation, an intrusive thought that was going, oh, dude, you totally want sushi. Like, it's not like she really has control over me per se. But if I cannot make a distinction between the intrusive thought that she applied, I certainly could make a decision to do the thing that she suggested just at the initial suggestion. There is a possibility that that could occur too, that I could just simply think, oh yeah, that's me thinking. So now
Is that the same as voice to skull?
that's basically how voice to skull works, is that it gets to apply the intrusive thought. And it can be this simple that people don't realize. It's just an application of intent in the mix of your other intentions. And if you don't realize that there's intrusion, that there's foreign application of intent, if you don't know thyself, and this is why they're doing all the collection of information, to be able to make sure that their suggestions are very specific. It's not just about ad suggestions. There's other things that they're learning to be suggestive about. They're pretty damn accurate with ads and what they suggest and what you're interested in. Now they just throw other suggestions in to that space that you don't realize are intrusive, and next thing you know, you're being guided.
And so essentially our thoughts could potentially not even be our own at
Correct.
some point, or even
Absolutely.
now, if they're able to collect all that data on us and like know us better than we know ourselves.
Correct. And it's really nefarious when you don't even get to be privy to know that that connection exists and it is being exploited.
And that's why, too, going back to what you were saying, I think people do have a hard time believing this because with other types of abuse, even if people don't believe that let's just say you or somebody else experienced the abuse that you went through, if
Mm-hmm.
it's physical abuse, sexual abuse, people know that that exists, and you can
Mm-hmm.
technically, if you know who the person is that did it, you can point to your finger to somebody and say, this is the abuser, they did it. Whether
Mm-hmm.
somebody believes it or not, that's different. But with this, like you said, you can't. It's like an invisible
Mm-hmm.
it's an invisible weapon. It's
Mm-hmm.
an invisible abuser. And so you can't point your finger when somebody's like, oh, yeah, well, who's doing that to you? Whose thoughts are they? Like, who's
Right.
speaking to you in your head?
Plausible deniability is built into this level of technology, and it's not by accident. It
Yes.
is the ability to lob weapons at your enemy without them even knowing that you're attacking them. There's a whole new level of lunacy.
Have you had any instances where you believe you've been attacked with directed energy weapons or voice to skull, or has that mostly not affected you
Oh,
personally?
absolutely. I have had engagements that I have had to question if that was exactly what just occurred. Yeah, there's been some super peculiar points in my past um, where things are so out of the ordinary that it didn't appear to be much other possibility. And then
That's
in especially South Pole Station, I think just myself and every crew member there is suffering health issues from being in proximity to technology of such magnitude.
And so what else would you like people to know about Antarctica or about these, directed energy weapons, that you think would be really important for society to either help with or take note of or just to be aware of?
Pay attention to the people around you and check for changes. Start to pay attention to the symptoms that are on the Havana syndrome list. And, these are your loved ones, these are your friends and family. And pay attention and look for signs of changes and help people the best that you can.
And do you have any, are there any like official websites or is there any resources if people want to like, share or start learning? Do you have a good place where they could start?
The only direction I can give folks right now currently is that I've been doing my best at deciphering.tv, which I'm trying to get communications out there with folks like Emma so that we just reach, a broader spectrum of audience, trying to lead by example, get this information out there. And there's other folks that you can find that we're connecting the dots with on other topics as well. Emma's very big into understanding the ritual abuse side of things. That incorporates into this topic as well. So, if you can go to the deciphering.tv website, click on some links, share some stuff with some other folks, it would be very beneficial to me. And things are always growing and making new connections. So it's always great to find out what we're going to learn next.
And this is the best place also for people to reach you, correct? On the contact tab here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the best way to get a hold of me would be through the website.
And are you on social media or is there anywhere else
I
that
am
people can?
currently I am on Facebook, and I'm also on X, Twitter, and it's just I think deciphering.tv with Eric J. Hecker.
Yeah, I'm happy to see you on Twitter. It's an interesting world there.
Hmm.
I think you'll fit in really good and be able to make some good connections there and have your voice heard.
Yeah, it
So
seems to be going well so far. The gentleman that I did the Brooklyn documentary work with had really kind of pushed me in that direction, or I should say, pushed me over the edge in that direction. I was kind of headed that way, but he really was the straw that broke the camel's back. So I do thank him.
And we thank you, Eric. And before we wrap up, is there anything else that you wanted to share on this episode or about any of these topics that we didn't get to today?
No, I think that was fantastic. I would just keep reminding the audience to, support truth in actual alternative media, not the big sham that's going on. So, do your best to help out folks like Emma with the work that she's doing, which is fantastic. If you could go to deciphering.tv is fantastic. And then anybody else out there that you follow, that you see, fighting the good fight, do what you can, copy, paste, share, do that kind of stuff. It helps.
100%. And it's free. People are always asking, what can I do to help? Well, go share and follow,
Hmm.
people who are risking their lives to do this. That's a super easy way and it doesn't cost you a penny and
Hmm.
really doesn't take you much time either.
Hmm.
But we're really grateful for you, Eric. You've helped really push this needle forward and your disclosures have been so critical to helping connect all these dots that so many people are either scared to, controlled not to, or under NDAs and aren't able to at this time. So
Hmm.
I'm really grateful, and I speak on behalf of everybody and just thank you so much for everything that you've done and for everything that you risk. I know it's a tough world out there. I know that you've gotten attacked, whether it is through these directed energy weapons, whether it's people trolling you, whether it's interviewers that aren't working with integrity whenever they invite you on their show. There's been a lot of opposition that has tried to keep you from going, and you've only just gotten stronger. So thank you for setting a good example and for being role model for people and just for all that you've done for these different communities. We're really grateful for you.
Thank you so much, Em. I really appreciate that.
Well, we can't wait to have you back on, Eric. And for
Absolutely.
everybody listening, if you guys have questions for Eric, I will have his website in the show notes. You guys can go there, hit the contact tab, and or connect with him on social media. I'll have the links for his Facebook and X below also. Again, it's super free. It's easy to support survivors that way and whistleblowers. And Eric's website is a gold mine of information too. If you're a researcher, somebody curious about these topics and don't know where to start, his website does have a lot of great information and super easy to click files you guys can open that'll take you to information that's corresponding to whether it's Stargate or energy weapons. You guys can get some pretty good resources to start with right on his website. So go connect with him. Also, if you're a content creator, just another reminder, if you're a podcaster, somebody looking to have an alternative way to share whatever it is that you're doing, whether it's a podcast or a weekly live show where it's just you. If you're somebody that's having trouble staying up on other platforms or just kind of sick of the censorship, Eric is generously offering his platform as a new home for you or an additional home for you, to share uncensored information and to help move this needle forward. So please go help him connect and connect this network and share that information with any other hosts, podcast hosts, or content creators that looking for a good home. I think we could really make Eric's platform a one-stop shop for the truth and create our own news network that's actual alternative media, not controlled. So go connect with him, you guys, and I'll have all my information in the show notes as well. We couldn't do this without you. God bless you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you next time.